Game of Thrones, The King's Court Wizard. Synopsis. In an alternate universe where Rhaegar triumphed and ascended to the throne as Rhaegar, the first of his name, Westeros finds itself on the brink of another civil war, more brutal, bloody, and devastating than the last, threatening to drown the continent in death and ruin. Meanwhile, dark creatures such as vampires, werewolves, griffins, and harpies ravage villages and cities. Amid the chaos, a visitor from another world, bearing all the magical heritage of the Harry Potter universe, decides to join the court of King Rhaegar I, making the chaotic scenario even more chaotic. Follow Cadmus Peverell on his journey as court wizard in a world where humanity struggles to survive alongside monsters, destruction, and intrigue, a deadly game involving divine forces, ancient creatures, and lots of politics. Game of Thrones with elements of Harry Potter / The Witcher. Chapter 01, The Wizard and the Witcher. 298 AC, 14th year of the reign of King Rhaegar I Targaryen, the Just. King Rhaegar Targaryen held a tourney at Harrenhal in celebration of the engagement between the Prince of Dragonstone, Aegon Targaryen, and the Golden Flower of House Tyrell, Margaery Tyrell. Cadmus looked at the green liquid in the vial with a smile. The light passed through the small vial, partially illuminating one of his eyes, adding a beautiful tone to the dark green of his eyes. Perhaps from spending too much time in a lightless environment, his skin was especially pale. The potion is stable, the purity has reached 98%. Cadmus murmured. He turned his head and entered his laboratory again. The place was filled with chemical vials of different sizes and shapes, cauldrons, and a Tesla coil illuminated the dark environment with flashes of electricity. Arriving in front of an iron cage, where a rat was located, Cadmus used his wand and made a wound on the rat. Nothing significant, just enough for the rat to bleed a little. The process was so meticulous that the rat itself barely felt anything other than a slight sting. Placing a drop of the potion on the rat's wound, Cadmus's dark green eyes watched intently as the rat's skin began a healing process visible to the naked eye. 5 seconds later, there was no longer any wound on the animal's body. I modified and improved the healing potion. I also improved the strength potion and the vitality potion, and even created the elemental resistance potion, a completely new potion. A smile appeared on Cadmus's lips. From today on, he was a grand master of potions, a master who could modify and improve existing potions. Looking at the small rat, Cadmus was in a good mood and released the rat into the surroundings of his magic tower. Looking at the laboratory full of advanced chemistry vials, Cadmus showed a satisfied look, and after cleaning everything perfectly, he left the potions room. He walked down the corridor until he reached the stairs and simply stopped on them. Surprisingly, the entire staircase began to move on its own, not the steps, but the entire staircase itself. The structure moved at a comfortable speed and stopped on the top floor of the magic tower, where Cadmus's quarters were located. Cadmus arrived at the room and sat on the sofa, feeling relaxed and full of a sense of satisfaction on his face. After 5 years of studying, he had finally achieved something he could be proud of. Remembering how he arrived in this world with only a grimoire containing the entire inheritance of the Harry Potter universe, Cadmus felt that he had never studied so much in his life. If he had such determination in his past life, he would have gotten into Oxford. However, unlike the physics and chemistry knowledge of his past life, magic was incredibly more attractive and tempting. That's why he managed to study for 5 uninterrupted years. Cadmus felt that Dumbledore should give him a medal for the best extra-dimensional student at Hogwarts. After all, if he were at Hogwarts, he would be in his 5th year and would have become the youngest Grand Master of Potions in British wizarding history and possibly the world. Letting out a laugh, Cadmus felt his body relax. After arriving in this strange and familiar world, he noticed that his talent was simply insane, something Voldemort would envy for eternity. The amount of magic within him and the precise control made him a true monster that even Dumbledore would have difficulty defeating. Although Cadmus was not confident in defeating Dumbledore, he was confident in saying that he would give the most powerful wizard of the current time a lot of trouble. Although he couldn't defeat the old headmaster of Hogwarts, he would make Dumbledore lose some limbs before dying. As for how Cadmus died, he preferred not to go into detail, but it involved an evil organization for world domination by pigeons. In short, he had discovered that pigeons were not only intelligent but also orchestrated many things in the shadows. Unfortunately, he died under the conspiracy of the evil pigeons. However, this alternate universe I'm in is quite interesting. Cadmus murmured to himself with a smile considered very handsome. Like any young person, he naturally knew the universe of Ice and Fire, especially being a fan of George R.R. Martin. However, this universe was different from the one presented in the Chronicles of Ice and Fire. In this alternate reality, Rhaegar emerged victorious from the war and ascended to the throne as King Rhaegar Targaryen, the first of his name. Rhaegar received the epithet the Just from the people because of his wisdom and fairness in bringing all 7 kingdoms together again under the banners of House Targaryen. However, Robert Baratheon did not succumb in battle at the Trident. His right arm was severed by the legendary sword Dawn of House Dane, wielded by Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, who was by his king's side in the war, defeating the demon of the Trident, Robert Baratheon, in a relentless and deadly attack. In the final outcome, with his army defeated, Robert Baratheon was imprisoned and, after a long debate, was released on the condition that he never leave the Stormlands, under penalty of being considered a traitor and suffering immediate execution if he dared to disobey the treaty. Honestly, it was a very wise maneuver by Rhaegar to avoid the wrath of the Stormlands lords, adopting a conciliatory stance by forgiving many noble houses, which practically ceased the war in the Stormlands, giving him space to focus on the other kingdoms still at war. However, houses like Tully faced serious consequences for their unprovoked betrayal, almost losing the title of Lord Paramount in the process. If it weren't for Tywin Lannister, perhaps House Tully could no longer maintain the title of Lord Paramount of the Riverlands at the end of the rebellion. An interesting event occurred at the end of the rebellion. Cersei Lannister married Edmure Tully and became Lady of the Riverlands. Cadmus prayed silently for Edmure for marrying someone like Cersei. The poor man didn't know that his children weren't really his, at least, that's what he presumed upon seeing the hair colors of Cersei and Edmure's 3 children. All were blonde with green eyes. Jaime Lannister was truly a brave man for sleeping with his own twin sister, a true snake in human skin. Not that Cadmus was less brave, his grandfather taught him that crazy and ambitious women can provide the best sex of your life, but run away the next day. Remembering the old man, teaching him the secrets of life, Cadmus couldn't help but laugh, feeling nostalgic for the grumpy, strong, but incredibly resilient old man. Unfortunately, it wasn't just a universe separating them, but also life and death. One of the reasons he could focus on his magical studies was that he had no one on Earth. His grandfather died, and he had no one, so he quickly got used to life in this alternate, but equally interesting, universe. Besides, the faith of the Seven really had the power of the god it worshipped. This world had monsters like werewolves, vampires, chimeras, and other mythical creatures. Generally, those who fought against these monsters were the armies of knights of each lord or lady of the noble houses, but there were also witchers, humans who underwent genetic mutation through the trial of the grasses, a particularly dangerous process that resulted in the deaths of dozens of children. Of course, there was magic, but there were few magic practitioners in Westeros, most in Essos, where they were more abundant. In short, this was an incredibly diverse and quite crazy world. Something Cadmus loved. Instead of studying, working, marrying, and having children, then dying, Cadmus preferred a crazier life. He would hate to follow the normal path again. This world was perfect for him, especially with future events. Suddenly, as Cadmus Peverell was thinking, he heard a sound similar to a sharp crack in the air, and an incredibly beautiful bird perched on his shoulder. It was an entirely black bird, the black feathers seemed to burn like embers, releasing sparkling particles into the air. The beautiful bird had red eyes. The whole bird looked elegant, noble, and incredibly proud. It was a black phoenix, and unlike its red and gold counterpart, it had a particularly powerful ability to manipulate shadows and flames, while also being able to grow in height and length. Note, like the black phoenix in Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. Mitra, did something happen? Stroking the feathers, which were warm to the touch, Cadmus asked with a smile. In this world, Mitra was his only relative, an egg he found by chance. A sharp cry sounded from the phoenix's beak, but Cadmus understood what his companion in arms was saying. It seems Gerald is back looking for more potions. Cadmus said with a smile, feeling that his coffers were getting full again. Chapter 02, The Wizard and the Witcher. Gerald rode on his mare Plotka with his unchanging cold expression, his golden, cat-like eyes scanning the forest surroundings. Although he knew that no monster would dare to enter a wizard's forest, in his long life, he had learned that everyone can be stupid. Being in the forest in the Riverlands, the smell of wet earth, damp forest, and animal feces hung in the air. The trees were large and dark brown. Curiously, there weren't many bushes, and a solid road was under Plotka's hooves. Gerald knew that the wizard had reshaped the entire forest like a god reshaping the world. Remembering the 13-year-old boy he first met, he still found it hard to believe that a child of that size could burn a werewolf with just a flick of his magic wand. Suddenly, feeling like he was passing through a thin but watery film, Gerald raised his head and saw a gigantic black tower rising into the sky like a pillar that seemed to support the sky itself. The tower looked like it was made of blackened stone that exuded a warm aura. The Witcher knew that 5 years ago, in the same place, there was no black tower, especially one so large and majestic. But, in less than 5 years, this majestic structure had actually appeared in this world. Which seemed totally impossible, but Gerald knew that magic made things possible. The road to the Black Tower was winding, covered with polished and elegant tiles, and an impeccably beautiful garden accompanied the road. Water fountains sprayed water while the statues of nude women looked inviting. Even though he was used to the scene, Gerald had to admit, the boy knew how to live his life. Whether it was the tower or the garden, they were things that even strong and rich noble houses could not afford. Arriving in front of the gigantic stone gates, Gerald dismounted from his horse and stroked the horse's slender neck with a little more force. Horses had thicker skin, so if the caress was too light, the horse itself would think it was a mosquito touching it. Good girl. Gerald spoke in a slightly gentler tone, which was rare for the cold and indifferent Witcher. He opened the bags and began to take out countless items. The bags looked normal, but they seemed endless. Gerald spent a lot of money to buy these bags from the wizard. After taking out an absurd amount of items, which could only be pulled by a carriage, Gerald knocked his fist on the door, making a loud, old, and long sound. The Witcher didn't have to wait long. The gates opened, and a young adult appeared before Gerald. He was wearing an intricate purple shirt with silver patterns. Over the shirt, a luxurious black vest outlined his slightly muscular, but still slender, figure. He wore black gloves on his hands and a smile on his lips. In terms of appearance, he looked around 20 years old, with pale skin due to the lack of sun exposure. His hair was black, completely black, like a raven's feathers. Silky and shiny strands fell below his eyes. Besides the impressive appearance, what mattered most were his dark green eyes like beautiful emeralds. Gerald thought the wizard was from Essos, probably a descendant of old Valyria. Common people and other human races were not so beautiful. But, that was not his problem. Gerald, my old friend. Come and drink with me. Cadmus was very happy with the Witcher's arrival. He was one of the few acquaintances and friends he had. I created a drink that will make you never want to drink the horse piss you drink in the north again. Gerald just grunted and pointed to the goods. Without caring about the Witcher's indifference, Cadmus looked at the jars containing the most important parts of the monsters with a satisfied look. They were not just monster parts, but also some herbs that could only be found in distant and dangerous places. Drawing his wand, Cadmus flicked his wrist, and all the jars began to float in the air and disappeared from Gerald's sight. If it were anyone else, Gerald would never have allowed that to happen, but he trusted the wizard. Besides, he had an idea of how much everything was worth, so he was never worried about being cheated. Cadmus took Gerald to the top floor of the tower, his quarters, and served the Witcher a glass containing Irish whiskey prepared by himself. Behold the drink of the gods. You can put an ice cube in it, but I advise you to drink it neat. Cadmus commented with a smile as he poured a glass for himself. Gerald didn't hesitate, and despite the high alcohol content, the taste was not as strong but more aromatic than any other drink he had had, but it went down his throat so perfectly that the Witcher took another sip. Cadmus was satisfied with the Witcher's reaction. Taking another sip, he looked at the Witcher and said with an amused tone. I'll give you a bottle for free. Enjoy it, because you'll have to buy from me later. Any work has to be paid for. Gerald said with his deep, hoarse voice. Cadmus smiled, but soon showed a solemn expression. The mission I gave you. Gerald also showed a solemn expression and spoke with a deep tone. I only found traces. It seems the creatures noticed I was investigating and disappeared. But they still exist, they exude a smell of death and ice. Cadmus looked at the dark golden liquid in his glass and gently swirled the glass in circular motions, watching the liquid begin to spin. He narrowed his eyes and was not surprised. The mission he gave Gerald was to investigate further beyond the wall in the north. Naturally, Cadmus wanted a white, or even a white walker, but it seemed the blue necromancer didn't want to be found so soon. As for why he didn't go personally, it was simple, he loved living and didn't want to enter combat with a being of unknown and powerful strength. That was stupidity, and wizards shouldn't be stupid like a certain Harry Potter who wasn't afraid of anything. It's all right. They will eventually advance further towards the wall and won't be able to hide anymore. Cadmus looked at Gerald and asked with a calm tone. Did you receive any peculiar visits? A raven or a child of the forest? Gerald frowned and shook his head. He would have noticed if he was being watched by a raven, although he was undecided if he could notice a child of the forest watching. After all, it was a legendary race that could practically become invisible in a forest. It seems the Green Seer is hesitating or cannot speak at this moment. Cadmus narrowed his eyes and thought. Again, it was not surprising. The three-eyed raven, or Brenton Rivers, was a busy man fighting the Night King. Shaking his head, Cadmus flicked his wrist, and a small leather pouch landed in Gerald's hands. 1,000 golden dragons, your reward for traveling so far. He said with an amused and relieved tone. Gerald took the money and nodded his head, feeling satisfied. Working with wizards was a good thing, they paid well and were not as ignorant as the commoners who reluctantly paid a dozen copper stars to kill some monsters. In comparison, now he had 1,000 golden dragons just for completing a mission. With this money, he could put even more silver on his sword and buy potions for the most diverse situations. Did anything noteworthy happen recently? Cadmus asked during the conversation, curious about the sudden increase in people passing through the forest. Something he had only recently noticed. The king is preparing a tourney at Harrenhal to celebrate the engagement between Prince Aegon and Lady Margaery of House Tyrell. Gerald said with an indifferent tone, without any hint of interest in the celebration. That prince who is rumored to be a pillow biter? Cadmus asked curiously while lamenting Margaery's poor fate. Marrying two gay men in two different universes is not just bad luck, it seemed destiny wanted her to be frustrated. What could be expected from a Dornishman? Gerald shrugged and was not surprised. Dorne's reputation for lust and decadence was known even in Essos. Cadmus smiled and did not continue the subject. Both men began to talk, but Cadmus narrowed his eyes and thought it was a good opportunity to finally enter the main stage of this world. Chapter 03, The Wizard and the Witcher. Gerald, you're a veteran witcher, you probably know someone at King Rhaegar's court, right? Cadmus asked with a smile. He was already tired of staying in his magic tower, he felt strong enough to protect himself now and finally wanted to show his ambition to the world. Gerald looked at the boy and nodded. I know the hand of the king, Raymondari. I hunted a vampire in his domain, Plowman's Keep. A man fiercely loyal to the king and a powerful lord in the Riverlands. Cadmus looked at Gerald in surprise. He never imagined the Witcher actually knew someone so important, but when you have skill, you realize you can meet the right people over a long life, especially one like Gerald's. Can you introduce me? I want to enter King Rhaegar's court. Cadmus didn't hide his purpose. He didn't like to lie, especially to his friends, of which there were few, a mythical bird and a cold witcher. Are you sure? The faith of the Seven is irritating toward magic users and even more prejudiced than they are against witchers. Gerald frowned and spoke in a solemn tone. The Faith of the Seven was the largest religious organization on the continent, with a history of nearly 7,000 years. It was a colossal monster that only House Targaryen at its peak had managed to fight. They'll need to pray a lot to their gods to face me. Cadmus said with a sarcastic tone. He didn't fear the faith of the Seven at all, in fact, he wanted to confront them, otherwise, his political life would be too boring. Gerald understood Cadmus's mentality. He too had once been young and full of ambition, but reality over the years had extinguished that youthfulness along with his ambition. Still, he said nothing to Cadmus. If young people listened to advice, they wouldn't be young. Besides, everyone had different ambitions. He couldn't simply stop something just because he thought it would be too complicated for Cadmus. When do we leave? Gerald asked in a calm, indifferent tone. For the sake of their friendship, he was willing to visit Raymond with Cadmus. At the same time, he also felt that having a friend at court would make many things easier. I'll store my tower and we'll head to Harrenhal, Cadmus said with a big smile on his lips. He was truly excited, especially to see people's reactions when they saw magic for the first time. Gerald looked at Cadmus with a confused expression. It was the first time the Witcher had shown an expression beyond coldness, indifference, and annoyance. Store the magic tower? He really had to believe that such a large tower could be stored? Seeing Gerald's expression, Cadmus's lips curved into an amused and proud smile. Just as Newton Scamander had created his suitcase with countless extension charms and atmospheric charms, essentially creating an extremely large zoo, he could do something similar. The only problem was shrinking the magic tower, but with a large amount of magical energy, he could do it, even if only for a short time. I'll surprise you, Gerald of Rivia, magic is simply the most interesting thing in the world. Cadmus spread his arms and spoke in a tone full of admiration for the vastness of magic's power to change reality itself as if he were a god. Gerald had to admit, the boy had a look that showed how much he loved what he did. A look he himself had when he just left Kaer Morhen. However, the disgust, contempt, and fear of people had made him lose that innocent look. I'm getting old and emotional like Vizimir. Drinking all the contents of the glass, Gerald thought with a laugh. Cadmus didn't hesitate any longer. He grabbed his suitcase and left the magic tower with Gerald. The suitcase was made of very beautiful dark green scaly leather, with gold details on the edges and a silver handle. Although he knew this would happen, seeing the next scene truly shook Gerald. With a wave of the wand, the entire magic tower began to shrink. The gigantic stone colossus disappeared in mere moments, transforming into a small black tower, resembling a child's toy. After that, Cadmus picked up the magic tower from the ground and, under Gerald's stunned eyes, he opened the suitcase and climbed inside it with his whole body. Aren't wizards gods? Gerald muttered to himself with a grunt. He could understand why the church detested magic users, such powers could simply end the reverence people had for the gods. And once someone ambitious enough appeared, it would be a great danger to the church's hegemony over the people of Westeros. Suddenly, a head emerged from the suitcase. It was Cadmus. He climbed out, and after pulling his leg from the suitcase, he crouched down and picked it up. Looking at Gerald, he said, "Don't underestimate magic, Gerald. Magic is someone's imagination and determination. Once these two things come together, magic distorts reality itself. In other words, magic is imagination and how much you want something to happen. The limit is only yourself and nothing more." Gerald nodded, feeling he understood a little more about the vastness of magic. He too wanted to be a wizard, but that was impossible. Before taking the mutagen, he had no aptitude for magic, and after taking the mutagen, his magical potential was so weak he could only perform magic through signs. In short, he had no talent, and what little talent he had was so insignificant that wizards despised witchers, who didn't know how to use true magic. Note, the wizards Gerald was thinking of were the wizards of blood, fire, water, and any other element. In this world, wizards are divided into schools, each element has a school, and most are on the continent of Essos. What about the garden? Gerald looked at the beautiful garden with a touch of regret. In his eyes, abandoning such a good place was a tremendous waste. You're more talkative, my witcher friend. Cadmus laughed and pointed at the garden. But don't worry, I don't plan to abandon this place. No non-wizard can enter here, and even if they do, they'll be sent back by the spells I placed. How could Cadmus allow his home to be invaded? Besides, he planned to build a castle in this location, which would serve his future plans. It wasn't that he wanted to be a teacher, but simply that he wanted to create a school and try, at least, to build up some resistance against forces that humanity could not face with armies alone. Gerald looked at Cadmus and mounted his mare, Plotka. He didn't want to talk to this annoying boy anymore. Cadmus shrugged and walked normally. Surprisingly, he could keep up with the horse's speed. If you looked closely at Cadmus's body, you'd see flows of air almost invisible around him, subtly propelling him forward. Suddenly, a sharp cry sounded in the sky, and a beautiful, noble bird landed on Cadmus's shoulder, catching Gerald's attention. As if noticing Gerald's gaze, Mitra looked with disgust at this lecherous man and turned her feathered head, as if looking at the Witcher for too long would dirty her vision or something. Gerald just grunted in dissatisfaction. It wasn't the first time he'd been scorned by the bird, though he didn't know why he was scorned, but he didn't ask either. Would he lower himself so much as to try to convince a bird to like him? Be a good girl, Mitra. Cadmus said with an amused smile. The relationship between Mitra and Gerald was funny in his eyes. Mitra despised Gerald's lecherous thoughts, and Gerald despised arguing with a bird. Mitra rubbed her feathered head against Cadmus's cheek and nodded, not much different from a human. After all, she was a phoenix, a being as intelligent as a human. Turning to Gerald, Cadmus asked with a smile. How long until we reach Harrenhal? Gerald thought for a moment and spoke calmly. About 9 days, if we stop to rest at inns and eat at taverns. No rush. It's the first time I've left. I want to enjoy every moment. Cadmus wasn't impatient. Studying for 5 years had forged his mind in the flames of knowledge. He had patience, determination, and the courage he never had in his past life. Gerald looked at Cadmus with a touch of pity. The boy seemed to think the world was beautiful and lovely. Maybe it was for some, but he knew it was a dirty world where prejudice, fear, and discrimination were like enormous mountains, especially for people who looked different, like him and Cadmus, who were a witcher and wizard, respectively. However, Gerald didn't speak and let the boy feel firsthand how bad humanity could be. Chapter 04, The Wizard and the Witcher. Walking along the King's Road, two peculiar figures could be seen, a witcher with 2 swords on his back mounted on a horse, and a young man wearing a dark green and gold cloak with a hood, obscuring all his features. A wizard must be mysterious to instill fear, Cadmus said, after covering his body with the cloak he had prepared for long journeys. The cloak was a magical artifact, and although he wasn't a very good craftsman, the cloak had basic cleaning spells, resistance to cold and heat, and looked extremely beautiful and luxurious. Gerald just rolled his eyes. Witchers tried to go unnoticed to avoid causing too much trouble, but Cadmus was exactly the opposite. Anyone wearing such a flashy cloak would be the center of attention in any town or village they passed through. After a day of travel, both arrived at a village. Since the riverlands were fertile land, the people seemed well fed, wearing clothes with vibrant colors, and life seemed quite peaceful. In Gerald's vast experience, it was a very wealthy village, as most villages he'd visited weren't so prosperous. As soon as Gerald and Cadmus entered the village, they became the focus of most people, especially children, who spied on both mysterious men with excited and curious looks. Suddenly, in the children's view, the hooded figure stopped, turned his head toward them, and showed a frightening smile. The children's frightened screams sounded the next second, before the children ran with all their might in different directions. Gerald looked at Cadmus speechlessly. Did you have to scare them? I didn't scare them, I just looked at them with a smile. Looking innocently at Gerald, Cadmus responded in an amused tone, finding it incredibly fun to scare children. Thinking about the future school he would found and remembering the ghosts at Hogwarts, Cadmus let out an evil laugh and promised to make the children suffer at the beginning of their school life. It wasn't that he wanted to be a teacher, but simply that he wanted to create a school and try, at least, to build up some resistance against forces that humanity could not face with armies alone. Gerald rolled his eyes and headed toward the tavern. He was too lazy to ask about the reason for the villainous laugh. A village might not have a healer, but it certainly had a tavern. After a long day of work, most men would go drink a beer or two. Drinking seemed to be ingrained in male genes. Cadmus followed behind Gerald with a smile and looked around with curiosity. Although this era had stagnated shortly after humanity stopped being gatherers and hunters, these people had things that humanity would only have in the Middle Ages. Which was quite curious. However, Cadmus didn't delve into it. He didn't want to lose his good mood thinking about conspiracies of the gods or anything like that. Arriving at the tavern, the smell of cheap alcohol and sweat made Cadmus's face show an expression of disgust. As soon as Cadmus and Gerald entered, everyone's eyes focused on them. Seeing Gerald and his eyes, there was contempt, fear, distrust, and indifference among the gazes of the men inside the tavern. Since Cadmus was with Gerald, he also received those looks, but he didn't feel anything particularly significant. If there was one thing he had learned, it was that learning to live your own life was fundamental to mental health. If someone keeps caring about what others think, that person won't be living for themselves, but for others, trying to gain useless and totally unnecessary approval. They're looking at us, I think they find us handsome. Cadmus whispered to Gerald, who simply looked at him with a helpless expression. Meanwhile, a procession of men and women mounted on horses traveled the King's Road, leaving a cloud of dust behind. All wore heavy clothes for the cold, regardless of the heat in the riverlands after a day of rain. In the middle of the procession, protected on all sides, a carriage particularly drew attention, definitely not for its beauty, but for the banner above it, against a white background, the head of a fierce wolf. Inside the carriage, a girl begged her mother. Mother, I want to ride with Rob and John outside, not stay in this boring carriage. You can't, you're a lady, Arya. Lady Catelyn Stark, née Tully, spoke in a tone of severity and reproach. Arya showed no weakness before her mother. With a look of deep disgust on her face, she responded loudly. I'm not a lady, I hate dresses and prefer to wear pants. The voice echoed outside the carriage where everyone heard and laughed, especially the women from Bear Island, who agreed with Arya, saying that pants were more comfortable to wear than flowery dresses. Catelyn only expressed displeasure upon hearing the words coming from outside the carriage. If it were any other lord with his vassals, something like this would be considered worthy of reproach, but not in the north, where northerners weren't afraid to express themselves, regardless of the consequences. Mother, don't mind Arya, look at the handkerchief I embroidered. A girl with a notable resemblance to Lady Catelyn spoke, calling her mother's attention, who promptly praised her red-haired daughter with 1,001 compliments. Humph. What's the point of embroidering a handkerchief you're going to give to someone else? Arya muttered dissatisfied, feeling displaced by the attention given to her sister and full of jealousy over the preferential treatment that was unfair in her eyes. You wouldn't understand, horseface. This tournament is my chance to get a prince as a husband, unlike you, who not even a pig would want to marry. Sansa mocked her sister, provoking a furious reaction from Arya. I'd rather marry a pig than the men you prefer. Arya retorted angrily, abruptly rising from her seat. Both stared at each other in silence. Both showed disdain for each other, not hiding the disgust they felt for one another at this moment. Enough. Both of you. Catelyn intervened before the situation escalated further. It wasn't the first time the two had fought since the march from Winterfell to the Riverlands. She began to miss and worry about her younger children, Bran and Rickon, who remained in Winterfell for being too young to travel so far. Suddenly, the carriage stopped, along with the entire procession, and Catelyn sighed in relief at being able to rest a little. Her patience and comfort were being tested to the limit during this day. Robb, who was sitting on a horse, dismounted and massaged the inside of his thighs, feeling the numbness in them. Riding is good, but riding long distances sucks. Theon, beside Robb, dismounted from his horse and grumbled. Don't be so weak, Theon. The heir of Winterfell spoke, looking at his friend with a smile. He continued. Look at Jon, he's silent without complaining. The bastard almost never complains, his mother makes sure of that. Theon looked at the taciturn Jon and spoke with an arrogant smile, his voice containing a touch of disdain. Jon Snow didn't show much on his face, though his eyes became slightly colder than normal. Stop it, Theon. Robb frowned and spoke in a commanding tone. Although Jon was a bastard, he was his brother, and he didn't like at all how Theon and his mother treated him. In his eyes, it wasn't Jon's fault to be born out of wedlock, but his father's, who didn't control his own dick. Theon frowned in displeasure upon hearing Robb's tone. He wasn't just a vassal of Lord Stark, but his ward, so Robb couldn't speak to him in that tone. He was the damn heir to the Seastone chair, not some filthy commoner. But he chose to remain silent, letting out only a snort of displeasure and full of dissatisfaction with his friend's actions. Both stared at each other with irritated looks. Jon let out a resigned sigh and spoke calmly. It's okay, Robb. We don't need to argue. Let's enter the village, I want a good night's sleep. Robb wanted to say something more, but seeing his look, the heir of Winterfell only smiled bitterly. He wanted to help, but Jon didn't want help, which left him very helpless. In his eyes, Jon had to stand up for himself, not accept everything he received. The men and women of the North naturally headed toward the tavern. Drinking and feasting had always been something the North greatly appreciated. Eddard, accompanied by his wife, daughters, and sons, along with the lords and ladies of the North, entered the tavern under the cautious eyes of the village commoners. Fortunately, the tavern was relatively large, so it allowed the entrance of dozens of people. The grey eyes of the Lord of Winterfell observed all the men seated around, there weren't many, 6 men to be more exact. However, his eyes soon focused on 2 figures seated at the corner table. There was no way not to pay attention to the 2 figures. A witcher and a hooded man drew attention wherever they went. Chapter 5, The Known World of Westeros. The known world is composed of at least 3 continents, Westeros, Essos, and Sothoryos, a large landmass, Aldhos, and a number of many smaller islands. None of the 4 major landmasses have been completely mapped, and much of the world remains unexplored. Continents. Westeros. Located in the far west of the known world, the continent of Westeros is long and relatively narrow, extending from Dorne in the south to the lands of Always Winter in the far north. The wall, the border between the 7 kingdoms and lands beyond the wall to the north, is 300 miles long, indicating that Westeros is roughly 900 miles wide at its widest point, east to west. North of the wall, much land remains uncharted. 2. Essos. Separated from Westeros by the narrow sea, Essos extends eastwards for many thousands of miles. It is larger than Westeros, but much of it consists of less densely populated steppes, plains, and deserts. The western edge of the continent is controlled by the 9 free cities, while the city-states of Slavers Bay are in the south-central region. 1. Much of the continental interior, known as the Dothraki Sea, is grassland ruled by the tribal warriors known as the Dothraki. Further east is Qarth and the fabled Jade Sea. The mapped lands of Essos are divided by the Bone Mountains, which run from the Shivering Sea in the north to the Jade Gates in the south. East of the Bone Mountains are the plains of the Yagos Enhai, Yeti, the Grey Waste, Mosovi, and the legendary Assai in the foreboding Shadowlands. Sothoryos. Sothoryos, also written as Sothoros, is south of Essos, on the far side of the Summer Sea. It is a large continent, perhaps as long as Essos is wide, consisting of deserts and jungles and mountains. It is said to be a haven for plagues and dangerous animals, and has not been explored much by Westerosi beyond the northern coastal regions. The Summer Islanders may have mapped the continent and its coastlines, but they do not share their knowledge. Off the coast of northwestern Sothoryos are the Basilisk Isles, and to the west is Noth. 5. Aldhos, possibly. 1. Aldhos is a large landmass to the southeast of Essos, across the Saffron Straits from the Shadowlands. It may or may not be a continent, and its size is still unknown, as it is on the edge of the known world. Islands. The largest island in the known world is Great Morok, between the Summer Sea and the Jade Sea to the south of Qarth. The second largest appears to be Ib in the Shivering Sea north of the kingdoms of the Ifquivron, followed by the largest of the Summer Isles, Jala. See also various other islands. Seas. Shivering Sea. The Shivering Sea is a frigid sea north of Essos. It is bounded to the west by northeastern Westeros, to the south by the narrow sea and northern Essos, to the north by a vast frozen wilderness called the White Waste, and to the east by lands and seas unknown, perhaps the Sunset Sea. The Sunset Sea. The Sunset Sea or Sunset Sea is a sea to the west of Westeros. It borders the Reach, the Westerlands, the Iron Islands, the Riverlands, the North, and the lands beyond the Wall. The Summer Sea. The Summer Sea is a body of water located south of Westeros and Essos. The Southern Sea has deep blue waters and is warm from the sun. The Jade Sea. 3. The Jade Sea is a large body of water in the far east of the explored world, beyond the Jade Gates, which separate it from the Summer Sea. The Narrow Sea. The Narrow Sea is the sea between the continents of Westeros to its west and Essos to its east. The sea is relatively narrow and easy to cross, but large enough to make large-scale invasions and military incursions between the Seven Kingdoms and the Free Cities difficult. There is regular trade across the Narrow Sea between the two continents and the port of Ibn. Westerosi nobles are sometimes fostered or seek refuge in the cities across the water. The Seven Kingdoms. The Seven Kingdoms refers to a realm located on the continent of Westeros, ruled by a monarch-styled king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the first men and lord of the Seven Kingdoms. The king rules from the Iron Throne within the Red Keep in the capital city, King's Landing. The kingdom's name derives from the situation 3 centuries ago when Aegon the Conqueror set to unite the lands of Westeros, which was then ruled by 7 independent realms, besides the lands beyond the Wall. The new kingdom created from Aegon's conquest is now divided into 9 regions or provinces. Regions and territory. The Crown Lands. The Crown Lands are one of the 9 constituent regions of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. It was never a sovereign kingdom, instead being contested by river kings, storm kings, and local petty kings until Aegon the Conqueror seized control of the area during his wars of conquest and made it its primary foothold on the continent. Since then, the Crown Lands have been sworn directly to the Iron Throne, held first by House Targaryen and then, after Robert's rebellion, by House Baratheon. 3. Some notable houses of the Crown Lands include Bar Emmon, Celtigar, Massey, Roshby, Ricker, Stokeworth, Sunglass, and Velaryon. Waters is a common surname given to bastards of noble origin in the vicinity of Blackwater Bay. Dorne. Dorne is the large peninsula which makes up the southernmost part of Westeros, and is one of the constituent regions of the 7 kingdoms. The lords of the ruling house Nymeros Martell style themselves prince and princess in the Rhoynish fashion. The Martells rule from their capital, Sunspear, outside of which sprawls the Shadow City. Notable houses include Alyrion, Blackmont, Dane, Fowler, Jourdain, Corgile, Santagar, Toland, Euler, Vaith, Will, and Euronwood. The Iron Islands. The Iron Islands, the Iron Isles, or the Kingdom of the Iron Isles, is one of the constituent regions of the 7 kingdoms. The Isles were historically ruled by Rock, Salt, and High Kings chosen in Kingsmoods, next by hereditary kings of the Iron Islands, and then briefly by kings of the Isles and the rivers. Since Aegon's conquest, the region has been ruled by House Greyjoy, lords of the Iron Islands, from their castle of Pike. The Iron Islands are home to a fierce seafaring people who call themselves the Ironborn. While some say the archipelago is named after the abundant iron ore on the islands, the Ironmen claim it is instead named after their own unyielding nature. For it is often said that every captain is a king aboard his own ship, so the islands are also called the Land of 10,000 Kings. 2. Notable houses have included Blacktide, Botley, Drum, Good Brother, Grey Iron, Harlaw, Hoare, Merlin, Stonehouse, Sunderly, Tawny, and Wynch. Bastards of noble origin from the Iron Islands receive the surname Pike. The North. The North, or the Winterlands is one of the constituent regions of Westeros and was a sovereign nation ruled by kings in the north before Aegon's conquest. The largest region of the 7 kingdoms, the dominion of House Stark extends from the border of the New Gift, which is controlled by the Night's Watch, to the southern edge of the neck far to the south. The north has been ruled by the Starks for thousands of years from the castle known as Winterfell. The only city in the region is White Harbor, while the most prominent northern towns are the Wintertown and Barrowden. Notable bannermen of the region include Bolton, Cerwyn, Dustin, Flint, Glover, Hornwood, Karstark, Manderley, Mormont, Reed, Riswell, Tallheart, and Umber. Bastards of noble origin raised in the north are given the surname Snow. The Reach. The Reach, historically the Kingdom of the Reach or the Green Realm, is one of the constituent regions of the 7 kingdoms on the continent of Westeros. It was formerly a sovereign nation ruled by the kings of the Reach before Aegon's conquest. It is the second largest of the kingdoms behind the north and is considered the most fertile and heavily populated part of Westeros. The Reach is considered the home of chivalry in Westeros. It is the place where knighthood is looked upon with the greatest reverence and esteemed the most. It is also the place where the rules for tourneys are the most stringent and managed. The Reach is ruled from the castle of Highgarden by House Tyrell. Notable houses have included Ashford, Caswell, Crane, Florent, Fossoway, Gardner, Hightower, Merryweather, Mullendore, Oakhart, Redwine, Rowan, Tarley, and Virewell. Noble bastards born in the Reach are given the surname Flowers. The Riverlands. The Riverlands, historically the kingdom of rivers and hills, are a central region of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, consisting of the rich, fertile, and populous areas around the 3 forks of the Trident and the northern Blackwater Rush. At the time of Aegon's conquest the Riverlands and the Iron Islands were ruled by House Hoare, the kings of the Isles and the rivers, although native river kings ruled centuries earlier. Because of their central position in Westeros and lack of natural boundaries, the Riverlands have been a frequent battleground. The people of the Riverlands are known as Rivermen or occasionally Riverlanders, and they are a mixture of hardy warriors, peaceful fisherfolk, and devout small folk. Their lords have a reputation for being notoriously quarrelsome, and are referred to as river lords. Noble bastards born in the Riverlands are given the surname Rivers. The Riverlands are ruled from Riverrun by House Tully, the Lords Paramount of the Trident. Notable houses of the region have included Blackwood, Bracken, Derry, Frey, Lothston, Mallister, Mouton, Mudd, Piper, Rhaegar, Strong, Vance, and Went. The Stormlands. The Stormlands, historically the Kingdom of the Storm, are one of the constituent regions of the Seven Kingdoms on the continent of Westeros. The Kingdom of the Storm was a sovereign nation until Aegon's conquest, in which the last Storm King was slain. The region is so named for the savage and frequent autumn storms that batter the coast after beginning in the summer sea. The Stormlands are ruled from the Castle of Storm's End by House Baratheon. Notable bannermen of the region include Buckler, Caron, Connington, Dundarian, Errol, Estermont, Penrose, Selmy, Stidman, Swan, Tarth, and Wild. Noble bastards raised in the Stormlands are given the surname Storm. The Vale of Arryn. The Vale of Arryn, the Vale, or the Kingdom of Mountain and Vale, is one of the constituent regions of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. It was formerly a sovereign nation ruled by the kings of Mountain and Vale before Aegon's conquest. The mountains of the moon surround the smaller Vale proper, although the valley's name is often applied to all of House Arryn's realm. The Vale is ruled by the Arryns from the castle known as the Eyrie. Notable houses of this region include Baelish, Belmore, Corbray, Idjin, Grafton, Hersey, Hunter, Melcolm, Redford, Royce, Templeton, and Waynwood. 7-8 bastards of noble origin raised in the Vale are given the surname Stone. The Westerlands. The Westerlands or Westlands, historically the Kingdom of the Rock, are a region in the west of the continent of Westeros. Before Aegon's conquest, it was ruled by the Kings of the Rock. People from the Westerlands are known as Westermen. The customary surname of bastards of noble origin born in the Westerlands is Hill. The Westerlands are ruled from Casterly Rock by House Lannister. Notable bannermen have included Baneford, Brax, Broom, Clegane, Craighall, Farman, Lefford, Lyddon, Marbrand, Payne, Prester, Rain, Serret, Swyft, Tarbeck, and Westerling. The Free Cities. The Free Cities, also called the Nine Free Cities, are a group of 9 independent city-states in western Essos, located west of the Dothraki Sea and the Painted Mountains and northwest of the Valyrian Peninsula. The Free Cities trade and interact frequently with the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. Many in the Free Cities consider themselves more sophisticated than Westerosi, with some considering the people of the Seven Kingdoms to be savages. Bravus. Bravus, also known as Bravus of the 100 Isles and the Secret City, and sometimes referred to as the bastard daughter of Valyria IX, is the wealthiest and likely the most powerful of the Free Cities. It is also the youngest of the 9 cities, and was founded by slaves fleeing the grasp of the Valyrian freehold. The ancestry of the founders of Bravus was highly diverse, and the founders of Bravus spoke many tongues. Because of this, they used the language of their masters, High Valyrian, as their common tongue. The current Bravasi tongue is a corrupt dialect of the original High Valyrian. Because of the diverse origins of the Bravasi, temples for all gods can be found in Bravus, including a temple for the Moonsingers of the Yagos and High of the further east. A seafaring city composed of many tiny islands, Bravus is known for its ships with purple hulls and sails, the powerful Iron Bank, the guild of assassins known as the Faceless Men, and the Titan of Bravus, the fortified statue and lighthouse that straddles the entrance channel to the city. Bravus is ruled by the Sea Lord, who is elected by the city's magisters and keyholders of the Iron Bank. Notable Bravasi include Sirio Farrell, a former First Sword of Bravus, and Tycho Unest Oris, an agent of the Iron Bank. Lorith. Located on the largest of 3 islands at the mouth of Lorith Bay, Lorith is one of the northernmost of the 9 free cities. It is also the smallest, poorest, and least populous of the free cities, as well as the most isolated. While the islands were originally inhabited by the Maze Makers, Lorith was founded when the followers of the god Boish settled on the main isle in 1436 BC. Notable Lorithi include Jaqen Hgar. Lys. Lys is located on an island near the southern coast. The blood of old Valyria still runs strong in this free city, and as such, many Lyseni, even among the small folk, resemble the dragon lords of old. Lys is well known for its pleasure houses, training slaves in the arts of love and selling them as concubines and bed slaves. Having once formed the triarchy with Tyrosh and Myr, Lys now frequently fights with them over the control of the disputed lands. Notable Lyseni include Varys, a eunuch and spymaster for several Westerosi kings, Salad Horsan, a pirate, and Selsale, Doria, a handmaid to Daenerys Targaryen, Lysan Omar, a member of the Golden Company, and Trigger Ormalin, a merchant prince. Myr. Myr is a coastal city renowned for their master glass crafters, intricate lace, and fine carpets. It is considered to be among the most advanced of the free cities, and famed for its arts and learning. While Myr once formed the triarchy with Tyrosh and Lys, they now frequently fight over control of the disputed lands. Notable mermen include Tina, the wife of Lord Orton Merryweather, Thuros of Myr, a red priest of Arhillar, and Cyrilla, the wife of Lord Dennis Darklyn, who was involved in the defiance of Duskendale. Norvos. Inland Norvos sits in 2 parts, one atop a high hill and the other beside the one. The surrounding area is a land of rolling hills, terraced farms, and white stucco villages. The city has 3 large bells, each with its own name and distinctive voice, which are rung to govern every aspect of city life. Norvashi men can be recognized by their dyed and upswept mustaches. The city is run by a council of magisters, chosen by the bearded priests. Notable Norvashi include Ario Hota, the captain of Prince Doran Martell's guard, and Lady Mel Ario, Doran's estranged wife. Pentos. Pentos is a major trading port on a bay of the western coast, at approximately the latitude of the Westerosi city King's Landing. The Prince of Pentos is chosen by the de facto rulers of the city, known as Magisters. Khalasars of the Dothraki occasionally make their way this far from the Dothraki Sea, but the Pentoshi are spared much of the raiding and invasions by paying tribute to their khals. Slavery is outlawed in Pentos, but the Pentoshi flout these laws by keeping servants who, in essence, are slaves. Notable Pentoshi include Illyrio Mopatis, a powerful Magister, and the Tattered Prince, the commander of the Windblown, a mercenary company. Qohor. Lying in the vast forest of Qohor, Qohor is known for its fine tapestries and its smiths, who have the rare ability to reforge Valyrian steel. The Black Goat is a prominent god in the city. Qohor's guard is comprised solely of unsullied eunuch slave soldiers, and has been ever since 3,000 unsullied soldiers successfully defended the city against a Khalasar. Notable Qohorics include Vargo Wat, leader of the brutal mercenary company called the Brave Companions, and Tabhomat, a master armorer in King's Landing. Tyrosh. A coastal city, Tyrosh is ruled by the Archon of Tyrosh. The Tyroshi are known for their greed. Traders deal extensively in slaves and Tyroshi pair brandy, and Tyroshi master armorsmiths make intricate armor in fantastic shapes. The city is often involved in conflicts over the disputed lands and the stepstones with Lys and Myr. Notable Tyroshi include Greenbeard, Roro Ahorus, and the flamboyant Dario Naharis, one of 3 captains of the Stormcrow's sellsword company. Volantis. The southernmost of the free cities, Volantis is situated nearest Slavers Bay, and does extensive trade in slaves, glassware, and wines. The city is the oldest and proudest of the free cities, and only the old blood, those who can trace their lineage back to Valyria, may dwell within the part of the city behind the Black Wall. Volantis is ruled by an elected triarchy. Volantine sellswords are often recognizable by their fierce tattoos. It is not uncommon for the Volantine to mark the faces of their slaves and servants with tattoos as well. Volantis is sometimes drawn into conflicts over the disputed lands. Notable Volantines includes the Triarch Bellico, the Fool Patchface, and the Widow of the Waterfront. Civilizations. The Valyrian Freehold. The Valyrian Freehold was a great territory that spanned much of the continent of Essos, but has since fallen to ruin. It was destroyed approximately 100 years before Aegon's conquest, when it was brought down by a cataclysmic event known as the Doom of Valyria. At its prime, the Valyrian Freehold encompassed most of the eastern continent and reached as far as the current free cities and the island of Dragonstone off the coast of Westeros. The Freehold was technically never an empire, however for ease of reference it tends to be referred to as one. The Freehold was an advanced civilization, and the dominant military and cultural power of the known world. Its capital was the city Valyria. The Freehold was ruled by the Lords Freeholder, powerful noble families. The most powerful of these were the Dragon Lords. Origin. Ancient Valyria was a civilization sheltered in the 14 Flames, a ring of volcanoes on the Valyrian Peninsula. Valyrian stories claim that dragons originated in their lands, although tales from Asai claim the beasts were brought to Valyria from the Shadowlands. The Valyrians tamed the dragons with magic taught by a vanished people from the Shadowlands according to the Asai and mastered the technique of raising and training the dragons into devastating weapons of war. They began expanding their influence, establishing the Freehold with the city of Valyria as its capital. Magic flowered, topless towers rose toward the heavens where dragons soared, stone Valyrian sphinxes gazed down through eyes of garnet, and smiths used spells to forge Valyrian steel weapons of legendary strength and sharpness. Rise to power and the fall of Ghis. Some 5,000 years ago, in the early days of Valyria, the old empire of Ghis dominated and controlled much of Essos. The Giscari attempted to stop Valyria's expansion and the burgeoning Freehold was involved in a series of great wars against the old empire. The Giscari lockstep legions attacked Valyria 5 times, but they could never defeat them. With the help of dragons, Valyria was able to defend and emerge victorious each time. Finally, in the last of the Giscari wars, the Valyrians marched on their capital, Old Ghis, razed it to the ground, and sowed its fields with salt, sulfur, and skulls, obliterating it and thereby destroying the old empire of Ghis. Adopting slavery from Ghis, Valyria expanded its influence over the surviving Giscari colonies of Slavers Bay, and continued to conquer and colonize further. Western expansion. The Valyrian Freehold continued to expand and conquer further west, capturing many slaves from conquered lands and using them to mine great wealth from the 14 Flames, as well as build great cities and roadways that led to Valyria. For many years the Valyrians were at peace with the Rhoynar civilization of the Rhoyne, west of the Valyrian Peninsula. From the colonial freehold of Volantis, the Valyrians instead crossed the Rhoyne and marched west to wage war on the Undals of Andalos. Rather than be enslaved by Valyria, the Undals crossed the narrow sea and invaded Westeros. The Valyrians overwhelmed the remaining Undals of western Essos and established colonies west of their peninsula. The Valyrians are believed to have traveled as far as Old Town, predating the arrival of the first men and trading with the elder races, according to Jellicoe. Septon Barth also claimed Valyrians came to Westeros because their priests prophesied that the doom of man would come out of the land beyond the narrow sea. Archmaester Pearstan speculates some tragedy or mishap fell upon them and led them to shun Westeros ever after. People and culture. Valyrians are famous for having silver gold hair and violet purple eyes, characteristics not found amongst any other peoples of the world. This can vary from white to silver gold to blonde hair, and from lilac to deep purple and pale blue eyes. The most noble of Valyrians were considered strikingly, some say inhumanly, beautiful. The Valyrian nobility valued purity of blood. Therefore, the practice of incest was common in Old Valyria, as the Valyrians would customarily wed brother to sister. These practices were not limited to the freehold. On Dragonstone the Targaryens continued to practice incestuous marriage and polygamy to keep the dragon bloodline pure. Legacy. At its apex, the freehold's capital, Valyria, was the greatest city in the known world, the center of civilization. Most of Valyria's culture, language, and craft was lost in the Doom, which was followed by the Century of Blood. Valyrian descendants scattered across the world, many across the surviving Valyrian colonies, the free cities, and across the cities of Slavers Bay. Many of the surviving Valyrians intermarried and became mixed with other peoples. Their descendants speak in various local dialects of Valyrian. Valyria is remembered for its ability to raise and command dragons and using them as weapons of war. This was demonstrated by the Targaryens, the last of the known Valyrian dragon lords, who used that knowledge to conquer and rule the Seven Kingdoms. Valyria is also remembered for forging weapons made of Valyrian steel, a magical alloy used to make weapons of unparalleled quality. The secret of forging such metal was apparently lost with Valyria, making those remaining weapons highly treasured and extremely rare. The Old Empire of Guise. The Old Empire of Guise was one of the oldest known nations and cultures in the world. It reigned supreme over much of Essos. Its founding and golden age predate that of its successor, the Valyrian freehold, by thousands of years. Harpy. The Old Empire used the harpy emblem of Old Guise. It depicted a fanged woman with leathery wings for arms, the legs of an eagle, and the tail of scorpion, clutching a thunderbolt in her talons. History. Rise. The Old Empire rose from the ancient Old Guise in Giskar, a city founded by Grazdan the Great. Old Guise fielded highly disciplined lockstep legions of free soldiers reputed to have been nearly unbeatable on the battlefield. The architecture of Old Guise was dominated by massive brick towers and pyramids built using slave labor. Since the Giskari hills were rich in copper, the Old Empire used bronze weapons. After colonizing nearby land, Old Guise began subjugating its neighbors. The Giskari expanded south to Sodorios and the Basilisk Isles, building Garrosh as a penal colony at Wyvern Point, Zamatar at the mouth of the Zamilius, and Gorgai on the Isle of Tears. Giskari Wars. After the Valyrians discovered dragons and quickly rose to power, the Giskari wanted dragons for their own. 5 great wars were fought between Giskar and the Valyrian freehold, 6 with the tall men of the kingdom of Sarnar participating in 3 of the conflicts. The Giskari won some battles, as there is a large ancient tapestry in the heart of the Great Pyramid in Mirian showing the last survivors of a defeated Valyrian army passing beneath the yoke and being chained. However, the Giskari eventually lost each war. The Old Empire fell 5,000 years ago. In the 5th Giskari War the Valyrians smashed the Giskari legions and used their dragons to burn Old Guise and its pyramids to the ground. The Valyrians sowed the fields with salt and sulfur to prevent any surviving inhabitants from returning. Government. The ruling structure of the Old Empire is unknown. 5,000 years after the empire's fall, Hisdar Zoloric's list of titles includes those of Scion of Old Guise and Oktarch of the Old Empire. This may imply that the empire was ruled by a council of 8, that it had 8 regional governors underneath an emperor, or that Oktarch was a military title or rank. It is uncertain if Hisdar's title has any basis in the Old Empire's practices. People. The modern Giskari people are mongrels of a dozen races and peoples driven together by the empire and its fall. They are spread over a large area around Slavers Bay, west of the Gulf of Grief. Giskari have dense, dark amber skin and wiry hair with red highlights. Men of the slaver cities are known to wear their hairs teased, oiled, and twisted into fantastic shapes. They wear cloaks of yellow with copper discs sewn on. Their tunics are embroidered linen. Below the waist they wear pleated linen skirts and sandals. The richest classes, who are primarily made up of slavers, wear the toker, and are fond of rich foods, such as dogs, octopus stew, and duck eggs. Legacy. The harpy is a Giskari symbol, in Game of Thrones, complete guide to Westeros. The old Giskari language, culture, and gods were largely forgotten over time, and the Giskari adopted the language of their Valyrian conquerors. Today, most speak a dialect of High Valyrian. The crumbling walls, step pyramids, and harpy statues are all that remain of the Old Empire's glory days. The unsullied tactics are considered a remnant of Old Guise. They are trained to fight in the same disciplined lockstep manner and are considered the legions of Old Guise come again, but are slaves instead of free men. The free iron legions of New Guise are also inspired by the lockstep legions of old. The harpy was adopted as a symbol by all the slaver cities and their silver coins are stamped with a harpy. The good masters of Astapor, the wise masters of Yunkai, and the great masters of Mirian have been training slaves for generations, much as their predecessors did, and are experts at it. The Rhoynar. The Rhoynar are one of the 3 major ethnic groups from which the humans of Westeros descend, the others being the Undals and the First Men. They were a culture of river-faring people who dwelt on the banks of the immense river Rhoyne in Essos. After being forced to flee in 10,000 ships during the Rhoynish Wars with Valyria, the surviving Rhoynar eventually settled in Dorne in southern Westeros. While most Rhoynar integrated into Dornish society, especially into the so-called salty Dornishmen, the orphans of the green blood have retained their Rhoynish heritage and language. The Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, who sits Iron Throne, claims the title of King of the Undals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Appearance. The Rhoynar were a slender people with smooth olive skin, black hair, and dark eyes. Some Maestas have controversially theorized that the people of Myr are related to the Rhoynar because of their similar olive skin. Culture. The Rhoynar practiced a number of customs that differ from mainstream Undal culture. These included equal primogeniture, granting inheritances to the eldest child regardless of gender. They also tolerated homosexuality. Due to their origin in city-states, The Rhoynar titled their rulers princes and princesses. Their influence made these customs standard in Dorne as well. The Rhoynar worshipped a number of river-themed nature gods. Their primary god was Mother Rhoyne, or Mother River, the personification of the river Rhoyne itself. Other gods include the Old Man of the River, a turtle god, and his adversary, the Crab King. Art and music flourished in the ancient cities of the Rhoynar. They were by and large a peaceful people, but were fiercely independent, and could be formidable when roused to wrath. History. The Rhoynar lived in city-states along the vast network of the River Rhoyne, including Arnoy, Croyne, Goyandrohi, New York Sar, Sarmel, and Sarhoy. The Rhoynish civilization was as storied and ancient as the old empire of Guise. The Rhoynar taught the Undals how to work iron, although the seven-pointed star of the Faith of the Seven teaches that the Undals received this gift from the smith. The Rhoynar used water magic to defend themselves from enemies. Garrus the Grey, Prince of New York Sar, is said to have driven hairy men from Than. However, the Valyrian freehold's expansion from the east threatened to overtake the Rhoynar hundreds of years before Aegon's landing. For some 2.5 centuries, the Rhoynish wars were fought between the Valyrians and the Rhoynar. In the last of these, Garin the Great, Prince of Croyne, led 250,000 Rhoynar to their deaths in battle against the Valyrians. Nymeria, Princess of New York Sar, led the surviving Rhoynar, mostly women and children, in fleeing Essos in 10,000 ships. During and after the Rhoynar evacuation, the Valyrians destroyed the great cities of the Rhoynish realm. Their massive ruins are still easily observed from the Rhoyne. Rhoynar in Dorne. Nymeria led her followers on dangerous journeys to the Basilisk Isles, Sodorios, Noth, the Summer Isles, the Stepstones, and finally Dorne in southern Westeros. Nymeria married a Dornish lord, Mors Martell of the Sand Ship, and helped him consolidate Dorne under his rule through Nymeria's War. Under the rule of House Nymeros Martell of Sunspear, the Rhoynar have lived and intermingled with the native Dornish since that time. Having abandoned the Rhoyne, most Rhoynar adopted the Faith of the Seven in Westeros. In the conquest of Dorne, King Durin I Targaryen differentiated between three sorts of Dornishmen, so-called stony, sandy, and salty Dornishmen. The salty Dornishmen are held to have the most Rhoynish blood, being dark-haired, olive-skinned, and living close to the shore. The salty Dornishmen no longer speak the language of the ancient Rhoynar, although they do speak the common tongue with a distinctive drawl. Unlike the rest of the Seven Kingdoms, equal primogeniture is practiced in Dorne as it was along the Rhoyne. Some descendants of the Rhoynar did not assimilate and continue to practice the traditions of their ancestors, however. Called Bay Orphans of the Green Blood, these individuals live on rafts along the river Green Blood and consider themselves orphaned from their mother Rhoyne. They are of pure Rhoynar blood and still speak the Rhoynish language in secret. The Dothraki people. The Dothraki people are a culture of nomadic warriors in Essos who range across the vast grasslands of the Dothraki Sea in hordes known as Kalassars. People of the Seven Kingdoms and the Free Cities also refer to the Dothraki as horse lords. Appearance. Dothraki typically have copper-toned skin, black hair, and black, almond-shaped eyes. Dothraki men wear their hair in long braids, oiled or greased with fat from the rendering pits. Dothraki warriors carry small bells in their braids, which ring softly when they move. They are only allowed to braid their hair after they have won a victory. A bell is added to their braid after each victory. The braid is only cut when a Dothraki warrior is defeated in battle, an act through which he lets the world know his shame. Only few men die with their braids never having been cut off. Men further might wear metal rings bound in their mustachios. Both men and women might wear painted leather vests over bare chests and horsehair leggings cinched by bronze medallion belts, although wealthier Dothraki might also have silver and golden medallions on their belts. Others might wear sand silk trousers. For footwear Dothraki wear leather boots, leather sandals which lace up to the knee, or sandals of woven grass. However, when visiting the Free Cities, the Dothraki wear rich fabrics and sweet perfumes. Being accustomed to riding horses every entire day, Dothraki warriors walk with a bull-egged swagger on the ground. The Dothraki scrub themselves clean with sand. Culture and customs. Kalassars. Dothraki live in hordes called Kalassars. Their chieftains are called Khals, while the wife of a Khal is known as a Khaleesi. The heir of a Khal is named the Khalaka. A Khao is one of the Khal's commanders within a horde. According to a semi-canon source, a Khaz consists of the personal guard of important individuals, such as a Khaleesi or a Khao. Blood Riders fulfill the roles of guards, brothers, shadows, and friends to the Khal in ways that run deeper than the oath of the King's Guard to the King on the Iron Throne. The Khal and his Blood Riders commonly refer to each other as blood of my blood. The Yogg-Saran are mercy men who move among the corpses in battlefields, cutting off the heads of the dead and dying. When the Kalassar is on the move, scouts range ahead while outriders guard the flanks. Kalassars keep two sorts of healers. The first are barren women who practice their healing with herbs, potions, and spells. Eunuch slaves, on the other hand, use knives, needles, and fire. Social status. The Dothraki consider riding a horse as a basic marker of social status. A Khal who cannot ride cannot rule. Custom decrees that the Khaleesi must ride a mount worthy of her place by the side of the Khal. Pregnant women are expected to ride on horseback almost up to the moment of birth. Doing anything else might be considered weak. Some women giving birth ride on a cart. A cart is of less prestige, and is further meant for eunuchs, cripples, the very young, and the very old. A man who does not ride is considered the lowest of the low. He is not even seen as a man, and considered to be without honor or pride. Although some are respected, women have a lower social status than men. For example, the blood riders of a Khal will not allow themselves to be commanded by his Khaleesi. Nonetheless, Even the mightiest Khal will bow to the wisdom and authority of the Dashkalain, the widowed Khaleesis who reside at Ves Dothrak. Most of all, the Dothraki follow strength. Should a Khal die without an adult heir, his Khos might fight among themselves to take the place of the fallen Khal. In the case that the Khal has a Khalaka who is still a child, this heir might be killed so as not to be a rival. Religion. The Dothraki worship a horse god. The Dothraki believe that when someone dies, the horse god parts the grass and claims the deceased for his starry Khalasar, so the deceased can ride the nightlands. The Dothraki further believe that the moon is a goddess, and that she is the wife to the sun. In addition, they believe in hell. Dothraki consider the earth to be their mother and think it sinful to cut her flesh with plows and spades and axes. This leads them to burn down fields, farms, and towns to return the grasslands to their wild state. Economy. Buying and selling is considered to be unmanly by the Dothraki, and they instead use giving and receiving gifts as a common way for doing trade. However, giving a gift in return might not always occur immediately upon receiving a gift. This is exemplified by the Dothraki selling their captives on occasion to the slaver cities. They call these slaves gifts, and as payment receive gifts from the slavers. Trade is allowed in the sacred city Ves Dothrak, where, by the leave of the Dashkalain, merchants and traders gather to exchange goods and gold, though they mostly trade with each other, and only little with the Dothraki themselves. In the western market merchants from the free cities come to trade, while in the eastern market traders from Yeti, Asai, the Shadowlands, and the lands from beside the Jade Sea place their caravans. The merchants are tolerated provided that they do not break the peace of the city, do not profane the mother of mountains or womb of the world, and honor the Dashkalain with the traditional gifts of salt, silver, and seed. The free cities, like Mir, Pentos, and Norvos, and the slave cities in Slavers Bay deal carefully with the Dothraki. The rulers of the cities give lavishly to every Khal who passes with his Khalasar, feasting them and giving them gifts, so the Khalasar will pass on without sacking the city. Slavers Bay. Slavers Bay is a cultural and geographical region of central Essos. Built from the ashes of the old empire of Ghis, Slavers Bay became a wealthy hub of the global slave trade. It flows into the Gulf of Grief. Geography. Slavers Bay is located along the south of central Essos. In the west it reaches the eastern shores of the Valyrian Peninsula and contains Isle of Illyria. Tolos and the ruins of Parish are located along the Black Cliffs in the bay's north. In the east of Slavers Bay are the Isle of Yaros, the hilly peninsula of Giskar, and the great slave cities of Astapor, Mirian, and Yunkai. The bay is separated from the Gulf of Grief to its south by the Isle of Cedars. 2. People. Although little Giskari culture survived the old empire's collapse, the modern people of Slavers Bay take great pride in their Giskari heritage, referring to themselves as the sons of the Harpy or the Harpy's sons. The cities each use a harpy as their emblem, similar to Old Ghis. Where the harpy of Old Ghis grasps a thunderbolt in its talons, the harpy of Astapor has a chain with open monocles at either end hanging in its talons, and the harpy of Yunkai grasps a whip and an iron collar in its talons. Although Mirian also uses a harpy as their emblem, it is currently unknown what their harpy has in its talons. The old Giskari tongue has been largely forgotten. Most modern Giskari speak in the language of their conquerors, High Valyrian. The dialects of Astapor and Yunkai contain a growl of the old Giskari tongue, whereas in Mirian they speak a bastard form of High Valyrian blended with old Giskari tongue. The modern Giskari do continue to write with Giskari glyphs. Descending from the Giskari of old, most Astapori have amber skins, broad noses, dark eyes, and black or dark red hair, or a mixture of red and black hair which is distinctive to the ancient Giskari. Astapori warriors of noble birth oil and twist their hair into fantastic shapes like horns, wings, blades, and grasping hands, giving them a demonic look, while other Astapori men might only oil their hair and beard. In Yunkai and Mirian, other nobility oils and twists their hair into multiple shapes as well, using combs, wax, and irons. The Yunkai I wear tall helms in order to preserve the stylings. In all three of the slaver cities, freeborn men and women wear tokars, which is a sign of power, as the wearer is required to hold onto the fabric with one hand whilst wearing it. The fringe on the tokar signifies a person's status. Economy. Slavery is the dominant industry of Slavers Bay. Stories told about the flesh marts of the slave cities are dire and frightening. The city slave traders form their ruling aristocracy. The slavers of Astapor, Yunkai, and Mirian call themselves the good, wise, and great masters respectively. The good masters are rivals of one another when dealing in bed slaves, field hands, scribes, craftsmen, and tutors. However, when dealing in their far-famed eunuch soldier slaves, the Unsullied, they work together as allies. Trained from a young age, the Unsullied are trained to be obedient, fearless warriors who feel no pain. The Astapori claim that the Unsullied are the lockstep legions of the old empire come again, although unlike the soldiers of these ancient legions, the Unsullied are not free men. Yunkai is known for training bed slaves who are taught the way of the 7 sighs and the 16 seats of pleasure. Mirian's fighting pits are far famed across the world, drawing trade to the city. Warriors are bred and trained in the fighting pits, and sold across Essos. The Dothraki deliver many of the slaves trained and sold on the slave markets of the slaver cities on Slavers Bay. Copper is plentiful in the Giskari hills near Mirian. Giskari wine, made from small pale yellow grapes native to the regions, produces a notably inferior vintage. Cities. Astapor. Ruled by the good masters, Astapor is far famed for its eunuch slave soldiers, the Unsullied. Trained from a young age, these men are trained to be obedient and fearless. The Astapori like to claim that the Unsullied are the lockstep legions of the old empire of Ghis come again, but unlike these ancient legions, the Unsullied are not free men. An old rhyme about Astapor says bricks and blood built Astapor, and bricks and blood her people, referring to the red bricks of which the city is built, taking their color from the blood of the slaves who made them. Astapor is also known as the Red City. The Astapori emblem is a variation on the harpy of Old Geese, which shows a chain with open monocles at either end in the harpy's talons. Yunkai. Yunkai is ruled by cunning and corrupted slavers called the Wise Masters. The city is also known as the Yellow City, referring to the yellow bricks the city is made of. Yunkai is known for training bed slaves who are taught the way of the 7 sighs and the 16 seats of pleasure. The Yunkish emblem is a variation on the harpy of Old Geese, which shows the harpy grasping a whip and an iron collar in its talons. Mirian. The largest and most formidable of the cities along Slaver's Bay, Mirian is as large as Astapor and Yunkai combined. The city is made of brick, but unlike Astapor and Yunkai, Mirian's bricks are of many different colors. The nobility of Mirian lives in step pyramids, each made of a different set of colors. The greatest pyramid of them all is the Great Pyramid, located on Mirian's central plaza, which stands 800 feet tall. The slavers who rule Mirian are called the Great Masters. Like the other slaver cities of Giscari descent, Mirian uses a harpy as its emblem. Asai. Asai is a mysterious port city in the far southeast of the known part of Essos, where the Ash River meets the Jade Sea at its eastern exit, the Saffron Straits. Asai is on the southernmost edge of a mountainous peninsula known as the Shadowlands, thus the city is often called Asai by the Shadow or Asai by the Shadow. To go to Asai can be described as to pass beneath the shadow, and the area of the Shadowlands and Asai are sometimes referred to simply as the Shadow. City. Layout. Asai sprawls for leagues across both sides of the Ash, and its great walls allegedly could contain Volantis, Karth, King's Landing, and Old Town combined. The population of Asai, however, is no more than that of a good-sized market town. By night only one building in 10 shows a light. The buildings, streets, and walls of Asai are made out of black stone that is greasy to the touch and seems to drink the light, making the city appear to be a dark and gloomy place. Structures include bazaars, halls, hovels, palaces, and temples. Trade. Asai is a popular trading destination for ships. According to a semi-canon source, it is not as important to traders as Yi and Len, which are more easily reached from Karth. Asai exports goods such as amber and dragonglass. Gold and gems are also common exports, though some say the gold of the Shadowlands is as unhealthy as the fruits that grow there. The city is usually traveled to by ship, but it can also be reached overland by caravans. Trading ships from Westeros and the Free Cities bound for Asai go east through the Summer Sea and the Jade Sea, which are connected by the straits at Karth, the Jade Gates. Caravans from Asai traverse the Bone Mountains to reach V's Dothrak. Aside from traders, few from Westeros visit Asai and little is known about it. The famous scribe and traveler Lomas Longstrider never visited Asai, though he apparently heard from merchants in Yi who did trade with Asai that the vast gold of Casterly Rock was famous even there. All foodstuff and fresh water is brought in by ship, as animals brought into the city soon die, and the waters of the Ash glisten black beneath the noonday sun and glimmer with green phosphorescence by night. The only fish that dwell in its water are blind and deformed, and only fools and shadowbinders dare eat their flesh. People. Asai and its few people have an ominous reputation in other lands. Asai are described as having a dark and solemn appearance. The Dothraki believe that Asai are a spawn of shadows and hold them in contempt and fear. There are no children in Asai. All who dwell there wear masks or veils, and often walk alone or ride in palanquins of ebony and iron, hidden behind dark curtains and carried upon the backs of slaves. Only the shadowbinders of Asai dare to travel up the Ash, and even they fear to tread before the doors of the Stygai, the corpse city northeast of Asai. Melisandre prays and sings in the tongue of Asai. Esoteric knowledge. Asai holds a significant amount of arcane knowledge. Of any current location, it is the most likely to have dragon lore. Ancient books of Asai also record the Azor Aha prophecy followed by members of the Arhilla faith. It is rumored that spellsingers, aeromancers, and warlocks practice their arts openly in Asai. Asai is open to all sorts of practitioners of the higher mysteries such as gods' wives, alchemists, necromancers, nightwalkers, pyromancers, bloodmages, as well as inquisitors, torturers, and poisoners, and even worshippers of the black goat and Bacallan and the lion of night. No practice is forbidden in the city, however depraved. History. The origins of Asai are lost in history. Even the Asai do not claim to know who built it, stating only a city stood there since the world began and will stand there until it ends. Maestas find it difficult to discern the truth about legendary Asai. Texts from Asai speak of the Dawn Age. Annals from the city tell of Azor Aha during the long night, and ancient books claim he will come again. Texts also claim that dragons first appeared in the shadow. Asai has been a thriving port for centuries. Before the Century of Blood, merchants from the kingdom of Sarner traded at Asai. Jarhan, one of the sea-green god emperors of Yi, extracted tribute from Asai during his reign. On the second of his 9 great voyages on Sea Snake, Corlys Velaryon sailed to Asai, becoming the first Westerosi to visit the city. Tales claim that Corlys lost his love and half his crew there, and he claimed to have seen the sun chaser of Alyssa Farman in the harbor of Asai. King Aegon V. Targaryen commissioned journeys in search of dragon lore from distant places, including Asai. Mirai Mazdur studied in Asai, learning from a moonsinger of the Yagos Enhai, a Dothraki woman, Maester Marwyn, and a bloodmage from the Shadowlands. When a wrecked trading cog washed up on the frozen shore, a woman of the free folk found scarlet silk from Asai in the wreckage. Her granddaughter later used the silk to mend the cloak of Mans Raider. Yi. Uti is a nation and region in Essos, east of Karth and the Bone Mountains and bordered by the Jade Sea to the south. Nearby islands in the Jade Sea are Leng and the Isle of Whips. North of Uti are the Great Sand Sea, the Shrinking Sea, and the Bleeding Sea. A great river runs south from the Bleeding Sea through Uti to the Jade Sea. East of Uti are the mountains of the Morn, the Shadowlands, and the city of Asai. In the common tongue, things relating to Uti are known as Yiddish. The realm of the Yiddish civilization is the Golden Empire of Uti, which was, according to legend, preceded by the Great Empire of the Don. Meister Yandel speculates that the Yiddish civilization was contemporary with the realm of the Fisher Queens, whereas the Yiddish priests insist that mankind's first towns and cities arose along the shores of the Jade Sea, dismissing the rival claims of the Sarnori and Giskari as the boasts of savages and children. Region. The land of Uti has thick green patchwork farmland and dense sweltering jungles. Rumors have it that basilisks roam the jungles of Uti. There is a trade route from Asabhat to Yin along the coast of the Jade Sea. The 5 forts guard the northeastern marches of the empire. Throughout Uti a great web of stone roads, built during the reign of the eunuch emperors, ensure that travelers can cross the lands of Uti without much trouble. These roads are said to be equal to the dragon roads of the Valyrian freehold. The sources of the Yagos Enhai have been bred by crossing regular horses with certain horse-like creatures from the southern regions of Uti. Daenerys Targaryen remembers that basilisks infest the jungles of Uti. Cities. Uti has more cities than any other land in the known world, and according to Lomas Longstrider they are much larger and more splendid than cities in the west. According to Colloquo Voter there are 3 older cities buried beneath every Yiddish city. Known cities in Uti include Yin and Jinkai, along the coast of the Jade Sea, and Tiki further to the north near the Great Sand Sea. The city of Asabhat is at the west boundary of Uti near the Bone Mountains and the Jade Gates. 5 massive forts known as the 5 forts are along the northeastern boundaries of Uti, between the Bleeding Sea and the mountains of the Morn. During the time of the Golden Empire of Uti, several cities served as the capital city, depending on the reigning dynasty. The Grey, Indigo, and Pearl White emperors ruled from Yin on the shores of the Jade Sea. The Scarlet emperors ruled from Siqo, which they built in the middle of the jungle, and which has fallen and been reclaimed by the jungle. The Purple emperors ruled from Tiki, in the western hills. The Maroon emperors ruled from Jinkai. In the present day, under the rule of the Azure Emperor Buletingai, Yin again is the capital of Uti. Over the last 2,000 years, a dozen Yiddish cities and 100 towns, and many farms and fields have been reduced to ruins by the Zorceriders of the plains of the Yagos Enhai. The people of northern Leng in the Jade Sea are Yiddish, while the south of the island is inhabited by the Lenjai. Society. Uti was one of the earliest civilizations where literacy arose. The most ancient Yiddish records are cherished and jealously guarded. Uti is the oldest surviving continuous civilization in the world, having existed under one dynasty or another since the Long Night 8,000 years ago. Other ancient civilizations such as the Giskari or Valyrians have long since collapsed. As a result their scholars tend to look down on other, younger civilizations as children and barbarians. The grand cities of Uti dwarf those of Westeros or even the free cities. Uti is ruled by a god emperor. Lomas Longstrider once described Uti as the land of 1,000 gods and 100 princes, ruled by one god emperor. Of old, the god emperors were extremely wealthy and powerful, and commanded large armies. In present times, however, 3 men claim the title of god emperor, while their power does not extend past the cities in which they live. Instead, the 100 princes rule their own realms as they see fit, as do the brigands, priest kings, sorcerers, warlords, imperial generals, and tax collectors outside their domains. There are many gods in Uti's religion, but 2 of the major ones are the Lion of Night and the Maiden Maid of Light. According to legend, their child was the first god emperor of Uti, the god on earth. A cult of sorcerers known as the Church of Starry Wisdom supposedly originates from Uti as well, hated and feared by the general population. According to legend its founder was the Bloodstone Emperor, and today its priests can be found in many cities throughout the known world. Men from Uti are bright-eyed and wear monkey tail hats. People from Uti use their family name first, their personal name second, the reverse of how full names are given in Westeros and the free cities. For example, the Scarlet Emperors were named Lo Doc, Lo Han, Lo Buletin, etc. Economics. One of their major exports is saffron. Other exporting goods include spices and silk. Traders from Uti travel to these Dothrak to trade. Wines from Uti can be found as far west as Pentos. Uti is legendarily wealthy. Its princes are said to live in houses of solid gold, and to eat sweetmeats with pearls and jade powdered over it. Bravus, Pentos, and Volantis are known to trade with Uti. Uti traded with the Sarnori when the kingdom of Sarnor still existed. History. Great Empire of the Don. According to scribes of Yin, all the lands between the Jade Sea and the Shivering Sea, the Bone Mountains and the Grey Waste were part of the Great Empire of the Don and fell under the control of the god on earth, the only son of the Lion of Night and the Maiden Maid of Light. He is said to have had 100 wives and to have reigned for 10,000 years, before ascending into the stars to join his forebears. He was succeeded by his eldest son, the Pearl Emperor, who ruled for 1,000 years. He was followed by the Jade Emperor, the Tourmaline Emperor, the Onyx Emperor, the Topaz Emperor, and the Opal Emperor, who all reigned for centuries. Each successive ruler had a shorter reign and faced rising problems, as mankind grew greedy and corrupt. The Opal Emperor was succeeded by his daughter, the Amethyst Empress. Her younger brother slew her and usurped the throne, an event which is remembered as the Blood Betrayal. He proclaimed himself the Bloodstone Emperor and began a reign of terror, practicing dark magical arts and necromancy. He cast down the true gods to worship a black stone which had fallen from the sky. According to the annals of the East, the blood betrayal is attributed as the cause of the long night, as it caused the maiden maid of light to despair and turn her face away from mankind, while the lion of night sent the generation-long winter to punish mankind. In the chaos that followed, the great empire of the dawn collapsed. According to Colloquo Voter, as recounted in his Jade Compendium, a legend from Eti claims that disaster during the long night was only averted by the deeds of a woman with a monkey's tail. The maesters of the citadel in Old Town doubt that the great empire of the dawn ever truly existed, but most do agree that Eti's culture is very ancient, and a few believe that they were contemporary with the Fisher Queens on the western side of the Bone Mountains. Golden Empire. After the collapse of the great empire of the dawn, the Golden Empire of Eti began. Since the end of the long night 11 dynasties of emperors have ruled over Eti, each known by a color honorific. Some of them ruled no more than half a century, but the longest ruled for 700 years. The transitions of power between dynasties did not always occur peacefully, and on 4 occasions, the end of a dynasty led to a prolonged period of civil war and anarchy. The longest of these lasted more than 100 years. Under the Sea Green Emperors, Eti reached the apex of its power. During the reign of God Emperor Jarhar, Leng was conquered. His sons further expanded the power of Eti, Jarjok Great Morik, and Jarhan exacted tribute from Karth, Oldgeese, Asai, and other lands. Chaiduk, the fourth of the Yellow Emperors, married a noblewoman of Valeria, and kept a dragon at his court. During the past 2,000 years, Eti has often fought against raiders of the Yagos Enhai, whose lands are to the north. According to Maester Yundel, the raiders of the Yagos Enhai have reduced a dozen Yiddish cities, 100 towns and farms and fields beyond counting to ruins. To combat these attacks, many imperial generals and 3 god emperors invaded the plains of the Yagos Enhai, but these attacks usually did not end well, as the Yagos Enhai would usually evade capture for such long periods of time that the Yiddish invaders would give up and go home. Lohan, 42nd Scarlet Emperor, invaded the plains 3 times without success, returning home after being unable to catch his enemies. After Lohan's death, his son, Lo Buletin, assembled a mighty host, supposedly of 300,000 men, and led his force into the plains, leaving a burning wasteland behind everywhere he went. During his campaign, millions of Yagos Enhai were killed. During the last 2 years of the struggle, the rival clans of the Yagos Enhai united against Lo Buletin under a woman called Gia, whose riders eventually descended upon Lo Buletin's host, slaughtering them all. Lo Buletin was among those slain. Gia had his head stripped of its flesh and his skull dipped in gold, so it could serve as her drinking cup. Every Yatter of the Yagos Enhai since Gia has drunk fermented Zor's milk from Lo Buletin's skull. Around 100 BC, the island Leng broke free of Eti, although the northern 2/3 of the island are still under the control of the descendants of the original Yiddish invaders. On the first of his 9 great voyages, Corlys Velaryon sailed to Eti and Leng on the sea snake, returning with such a large amount of spices, silks, and jade, which made House Velaryon the wealthiest house in the 7 kingdoms for a while. In the present day, Eti is ruled from Yin by the 17th Azure Emperor, Buletin Gai. However, the amount of power he has is weak compared to older god emperors, and the local governors and tax collectors have carved out 100 princedoms among the provinces. In Carcassa, on the Hidden Sea, an exiled sorcerer lord resides, who claims to be the 69th Yellow Emperor. In addition, a general called Polquo has named himself the first of the Orange Emperors, using Trader Town as his capital. Leng. Leng is a large island in the Jade Sea, off the southern coast of Essos. To the north is the city of Jinkai in Eti. East of Leng are the Shadowlands, while to the south are the Manticore Isles. The island of Murahai is to the southwest. Leng is ruled by god empresses. Geography. Leng is an island of forests and jungles, rich in spices and gemstones. According to Lomas Longstrider, the verdant Isle of Leng is home to 10,000 tigers and 10 million monkeys. The island is also famous for its great apes, including spotted humpback apes, almost as intelligent as men, and hooded apes, large as giants and very strong. Some of the striped horse-like creatures bred with horses by the Yagos Enhai to create Zorses come from Leng. The city of Lengma is located on the central western coast, Lengyi is a principal town on the northern coast, and Turani is a port city on the southern shore. The people of northern Leng are descended from Eti, while the people of southern Leng, the Lenjai, are a culture native to the island. The Yiddish descendants appear very similar to the people of the Golden Empire of Eti, speaking a dialect of the Yiddish language, praying to the same gods, eating the same foods, following the same customs. They even venerate the Azure Emperor in Yin, although they worship only the god empress of Leng. Furthermore, Lengma and Lengyi resemble Yiddish cities in culture and design, whereas Turani's Lenjai culture is very different. In the depth of the island's jungles are strange ruined cities, with massive, fallen buildings. The buildings are so overgrown with plants that only rubble is visible, but underground are endless labyrinths of tunnels that lead to vast chambers, and carved steps descend hundreds of feet into the earth. No one knows when these cities were built or by whom, and perhaps they are the only thing remaining of some extinct people. Those who entered the underground ruins often returned mad, and even today it is forbidden to enter them, under penalty of death. History. Leng was an isolated island for most of its history, as the Lenjai did not welcome outsiders. Those who attempted to harvest the island's resources met a foul end, and it thus was avoided by mariners. Leng became known as a haunt of demons and sorcerers, a closed island. Merchants from the Golden Empire of Yeti periodically managed to open Leng to trade. However, according to the Jade Compendium, the old ones who lived below the island's subterranean ruins instructed the Empress of Leng to kill the foreign merchants on at least 4 occasions. Leng was eventually conquered by Jarhar, the 6th Sea Green Emperor of Yeti. He sealed the entrances to the underground cities and ordered them to be forgotten, after which there were no more massacres. The Yiddish colonized most of the island, with the Lengi confined to the southern third. Leng overthrew Yiddish rule 400 years ago, and power returned to the god empresses. Kiara the Great established a tradition whereby the empress takes 2 husbands, one each of Lengi and Yiddish descent, with one commanding the island's armies and the other its fleet. Some of the great wealth acquired by Lord Corlys Velaryon during his 9 voyages was from Leng. In 111 AC or 112 AC, Prince Daemon Targaryen gifted his niece Princess Rhaenor with a jade tiara said to have belonged to the Empress of Leng. Noth, known to the ancients as the Isle of Butterflies, is an island in the Summer Sea off the northwestern coast of Sothorios. The natives of the island are known as Nadi. Geography. Noth is west of the Basilisk Isles and northern Sothorios. It is located east of the southernmost and largest of the Summer Isles, Jala, and due south of the Valyrian Peninsula. Noth is separated from Jala and Valyria by large stretches of the Summer Sea. Noth is said to be a fair isle. It contains the ruins of a Valyrian fort with walls of fused dragonstone. History. During the height of the old empire of Geese, one of their ships briefly landed in the Summer Isles, alerting their inhabitants that lands and peoples existed beyond their own waters. Explorers from the Summer Isles then landed on Noth to the east. The Giscari seized Noth 3 times, and the isle has frequently been raided by corsairs from the Basilisk Isles. The Valyrian freehold erected a dragonstone fort, and a company of Volantine adventurers built a trade town with timber palisades and slave pens. The Nadi claim that none of these invaders maintained a permanent presence on the island for more than a single year, however, as the outsiders fell victim to the so-called butterfly fever which does not affect the peaceful people themselves. 1,000 years ago, Nadi welcomed the 10,000 ships of Rhoynar led by Princess Nymeria, who stopped at Noth after fleeing from their failed attempt to settle in Sothorios. When they began dying from an unknown illness, however, presumably butterfly fever, the Rhoynar returned to their ships and departed. Slavers and corsairs learned to limit their time on the island to avoid catching butterfly fever, instead capturing the peaceful people in brief nighttime raids. The captives were then sold in Valyria and Slavers Bay. The slaver attacks worsened during the Century of Blood, since Valyria no longer controlled the seas after the Doom. Unwilling to break their vows of total pacifism, even to defend their homes and persons, the Nadi fled from their coasts to the hills and forests. As a result, the silk exports which once flowed from Noth have dwindled away. Missandei and her 3 brothers, including Mosadir and Marzelan, were taken from Noth by raiders from the Basilisk Isles and then sold into slavery in Astapor. The Children of the Forest. The Children of the Forest, sometimes referred to simply as the Children, are a mysterious non-human race that originally inhabited the continent of Westeros during the Dawn Age long before the arrival of the first men thousands of years ago. The giants call them Wodok Nag Gram, little squirrel people. They call themselves those who sing the song of earth in the true tongue. The children have not been seen by men for hundreds of years. Characteristics. The children are smaller than humans, but they are not childlike. They have nut-brown skin, dappled like a deer's with paler spots. Their hands have only 3 fingers and a thumb, with sharp black claws instead of nails. They have large ears that can hear things that no man can hear. 3. They usually have large gold and green eyes slitted like those of a cat, one allowing them to see in dark passages. The children are slight, quick, and graceful. They weave leaves and vines and flowers into their hair, and wear cloaks of leaves. They may live for centuries. They often sing in their language, the true tongue. Very rarely, one of the children is born with mossy green or blood-red eyes, a sign that they have been chosen by the old gods. The chosen ones are not robust, and do not live long on the earth, but they have the gift of green sight and are known as green seers. Once they are bound to a weirwood, they live far longer than other children. The children are omnivores as they feed on different types of food they find and cultivate in and around their caves such as fish, meat, mushroom, cheese, milk, oats, barleycorn, dried fruit, and onions. Culture. The children may have lived in clans. They did not use metal, weave cloth, or build cities. The children lived off the land, using stone and obsidian implements, wearing bark leg bindings and shirts of woven leaves, dwelling in caves, crannogs, and hidden tree villages. Males and females both hunted side by side as wood dancers, using obsidian weapons, weirwood bows, and flying snares made with grasses. The children had no books, no ink, no parchment, and no written language. They were a people with a deep connection to the land. The children used their weirwood hunting bows and obsidian weapons in battle, but also used powerful magic. Legends say the children of the forest were gifted with supernatural powers. These included having power over the beasts of the wood, the ability to wear an animal's skin, the skill to create music so beautiful as to bring tears to the eyes of any who heard it, the green sight ability and the ability to speak to the dead. It was the children who carved faces on weirwoods to keep watch over the woods. The children of the forest believed that the weirwood trees were gods, and when they died they became a part of them. Septon Barth believed that the children could communicate from afar with ravens. It is unknown if there is a connection between the children of the forest and the Ifquavron, or woods walkers, of northern Essos. There is a ruined settlement of carved trees and haunted grottos, called by the Dothrakivis Lazy, in the kingdom of the Ifquavron. History. Dawn Age. It is unknown where the children of the forest came from, nor for how long they were in their land before humans arrived. For thousands of years during the Dawn Age, the children and the giants shared the land mass that later became known as Westeros. The two races are believed to have sometimes fought, since Maester Kenneth found a giant sparrow near Long Lake with obsidian arrowheads in the ribs. The children lived throughout Westeros, from the summer sea to the land of always winter. They called Dorne the Empty Land, however, and Maester stout that the children lived on the Iron Islands. First men. Eventually, between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago, the children came in contact with the first men, the first outsiders. Legends of the Reach claim they were led by Garth Greenhand. Crossing the Arm of Dorne, the land bridge connecting Westeros and Essos, these invaders built permanent settlements and brought with them bronze weapons, great leathern shields, the first horses, and their own gods. The children initially welcomed the newcomers, but they disliked the first men's harvesting of trees from forests, such as the rainwood. Fearing that the children used heart trees for spying, the first men burned and cut down the great weirwoods as they came, leading to war between the two races. For thousands of years the two races fought a desperate war for dominance. The legendary Brandon of the Bloody Blade slew numerous children at Red Lake. In a futile attempt to end the invasion, the children used the Hammer of the Waters to shatter the Arm of Dorne with the breaking, creating the broken arm and the stepstones. The histories say that some of the first men, the Crannogmen, grew close to the children of the forest in the days when the Green Seers at the Children's Tower of Moat Cailin tried to bring the Hammer of the Waters down upon the neck. Eventually the first men and the children fought to a standstill. The two races agreed to peaceful coexistence and signed the pact on the Isle of Faces, granting the open lands to humanity and the forests to the children, who had been greatly diminished. The children taught worship of the old gods to the first men. Age of Heroes. The Age of Heroes followed the pact between the children and the first men, 4,000 years of relative peace between the races. 5. Eventually the enigmatic others invaded from the uttermost north, bringing death and destruction to children and first men, during an extended period of winter known as the Long Night. The children joined with the first men, led by the last hero, to fight against the others in the battle for the dawn. Eventually the others were driven back into the lands of always winter. Bran the Builder, the legendary founder of House Stark, is said to have enlisted the magical aid of the children during the construction of the wall. The children began their slow withdrawal from the lands of men, retreating deeper into their forests and beyond the wall. It was recorded by the Night's Watch that the children of the forest gave the Black Brothers 100 obsidian daggers every year during the Age of Heroes. The free folk believe that Gendel and Gorn once mediated between rival children and giants. Children and their Green Seers supported the Warg King at Sea Dragon Point, but they were defeated by the Starks of Winterfell, the Kings of Winter. The Winged Knight in the Vale is said to have wed one of the children, but she died during childbirth. Some legends claim that children helped Durin build the seventh castle of Storm's End. Some Maesters of the Citadel, such as Jellicoe, lived among the children. Undals. The children again warred with humans when the Undals began migrating from Andalos across the narrow sea to Westeros. Zealous in the faith of the Seven and armed with steel, having learned of ironworking from the Rhoynar, the Undals resumed the cutting down and burning of weirwoods. Children are said to have sent wolves against Undals at the Whitewood. The Storm King Durin XXI Durandon formed the Weirwood alliance with the remaining children in the Stormlands against the new invaders. Having seen the Undals overwhelm other kingdoms, Gwaine Gardner, king of the Reach, sent men to seek aid from the children, although it is unknown if any were found. A hill, now known to the Westerosi as High Heart, was sacred to the children of the forest. There the Undal king Urig the Kinslayer cut down the children's grove of 31 weirwoods. High Heart is said to be haunted by the ghosts of the children who died there, where the children's magic is said to still linger. True history states that the children had already abandoned the Riverlands before the arrival of the Undals, however. Because of the Undals' invasion and conquest of the first men, the old gods were largely supplanted south of the Neck by the faith of the Seven. Moat Cailin held back the Undals from the north, however, so some children fled north. During the reign of Doran Stark, king in the north, the Ranger Redwyne traded with children during a journey to Lorne Point and the frozen shore. Relations between the children and humans grew distant over the years, until they ceased altogether. Maesters largely believe the children have been gone for hundreds or thousands of years, but the free folk believe they still live beyond the wall. Some scholars have suggested that children may have survived at the Isle of Faces or in the bogs of the Neck. Some also theorize that the Crannogmen of the Neck intermarried with the children. Jenny of Oldstones always claimed that her Wood's Witch friend was one of the children. Lord Eddard Stark taught his offspring in their youth about the Age of Heroes and the children of the forest. House Targaryen of Kings. House Targaryen of King's Landing is a noble family of Valyrian descent who once ruled the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. The Targaryen sigil is a red 3-headed dragon, breathing red flames on black. The house words are fire and blood. The only family of dragon lords who survived the doom of Valyria, the Targaryens left the Valyrian freehold 12 years before the doom. They resided for more than a century at Dragonstone Castle on Dragonstone Island, until Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, began the first of the wars of conquest in 2 BC. During Aegon's conquest, the family built the Aegon Fort in the new capital city of King's Landing. The Aegon Fort was later torn down and replaced by the Red Keep, which remained their main seat for the duration of their dynasty, and which housed the Iron Throne. Their original castle was almost always given to the heir to the throne, the Prince of Dragonstone. The Targaryens eventually built the summer residence Summerhall, which has been given to several younger sons of the family over time. House Targaryen ruled as the kings of the Undals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, the lords of the 7 kingdoms, and the great house of the Crown Lands for nearly 300 years. 17 male Targaryens ruled from the Iron Throne. The dynasty ended with the death of Aerys the Mad King during Robert's Rebellion, in which the Targaryens were overthrown and replaced by House Baratheon. The two surviving children of Aerys II, Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen, fled into exile, and have resided in the free cities of Essos ever since. Culture. Traits. The phrase Blood of the Dragon refers to the Valyrian descent of the Targaryens, and more specifically to the fact that they were one of 40 Dragonlord families of the Valyrian freehold. The Targaryens are renowned for their beauty. They usually have typical Valyrian features, pale skin, silver, platinum, or gold hair and eyes in various shades of purple or light blue. A few Targaryens had darker hair, such as Princess Rhaenys, Prince Baelor Breakspear, Prince Valar, and Prince Doran. According to semi-canon sources, the Targaryens can tolerate more heat than most ordinary people, but they are not immune to fire. The Targaryens long believed themselves immune to illness, but Princess Daenerys then died of the shivers, and the Great Spring Sickness claimed the lives of King Doran II, Prince Valar, and Prince Muttaris. Another trait typical to Targaryens is the ability to have premonition-like dreams. The trait has been in House Targaryen since before the doom of Valyria, with the dreams of Daenerys Targaryen compelling the family to relocate from Valyria to Dragonstone in 114 BC. This trait was passed on to a branch of the family, House Blackfyre, as well. The Targaryens are seen as prone to madness, presumably caused by their inbreeding. According to King Jaehaerys II Targaryen, madness and greatness are two sides of the same coin. Every time a new Targaryen is born, the gods toss the coin in the air and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. Customs. House Targaryen's words are fire and blood. Their sigil is a three-headed dragon breathing flames, red on black. The three-headed dragon represents Aegon the Conqueror and his two sisters, Rhaenys and Visenya. King Aegon II Targaryen used a golden dragon to rally his supporters during the Dance of the Dragons. Some younger sons of the house used variations of the standard sigil. Before his own reign, Rhaegar I Targaryen used the three-headed dragon, quartered, while his son, Prince Aerion Targaryen, changed the colors of the three heads, one orange, one yellow, one red, while the flames they breathed had a sheen of gold leaf. In line with the sigil colors, most Targaryens used armor black in color. For instance, Prince Aemon Targaryen had night black armor chased with gold. Prince Valar Targaryen wore armor black as knight in the tourney at Ashford Meadow, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had the three-headed dragon wrought in rubies on his black breastplate. Although the Targaryen kings took their seat at King's Landing, the place where Aegon and his army first landed in Westeros and made their first fort, replaced by the Red Keep later on, their earlier seat of Dragonstone remained in their possession as well. It eventually became the traditional seat of the heir apparent to the throne, who was known as the Prince of Dragonstone, or Princess of Dragonstone, in a few occasions. In 188 AC, the Targaryens eventually built a third seat, Summerhall, which was granted to several younger sons who were granted the title Prince of Summerhall. House Targaryen historically followed the old gods of Valyria, but at some point before Aegon's conquest the family abandoned the Valyrian gods and converted to the faith of the Seven, the predominant religion in Westeros. The masts of the ships which carried the first Targaryens from Valyria were used to create the statues of the Seven within Dragonstone's sept, and Aegon prayed in the sept before beginning his conquest. Against the doctrines of the faith, however, the family continued to follow the Valyrian practice of incestuous marriage, wedding brother to sister, cousin to cousin, uncle to niece and aunt to nephew, holding themselves apart from and above the noble Westerosi families. This was eventually formulated as the doctrine of exceptionalism. 28. Deceased Targaryens are traditionally cremated, a custom since the days of old Valyria. If a dragon is available, it is used to light the flame of the pyre. The ashes of many of the dead of House Targaryen have been interred on Dragonstone, including those of King Aegon I, Queen Visenya, King Rhaegar I, Princess Daenerys, Princess Dahlia, King Jaehaerys I, and Queen Aly's Anne. However, Queen Rhaenyra's ashes were interred at Harrenhal, and her daughter Princess Arya's ashes were scattered on the wind. Dragons. As one of the 40 Dragonlord families of Valyria, the Targaryens were closer to dragons than other men. Aenar Targaryen brought 5 dragons with him when he moved from Valyria to Dragonstone, and Aegon I Targaryen and his sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, rode them to battle during the conquest of the Seven Kingdoms in 2 BC, 1 AC. The Targaryens rode their dragons during the first century and a half following Aegon's conquest. Deaths in battle, especially during the Dance of the Dragons, and a growing infirmity in each following generation caused the family's stable to dwindle. The last dragon was a deformed and sterile creature, who died young in 153 AC, during the reign of Aegon III, the Dragonbane. The Targaryens housed their dragons in an immense domed structure in King's Landing, the Dragon Pit, which was constructed during the reign of Rhaegar I Targaryen. Not all dragons which hatched were written, however. On the island of Dragonstone, several dragons, both wild and previously written, resided at least during the reigns of King Jaehaerys I, Viserys I, and Aegon II Targaryen. The Targaryens often gifted a newborn child with a dragon's egg in the cradle. This practice continued even after the death of the last dragon, with the last Targaryens confirmed to have been given an egg having been the sons of Prince Makar during the reign of Doran II Targaryen. Whether the tradition was continued beyond this point is unknown, but the Targaryens still possessed eggs as recently as the reign of Aerys II Targaryen, the last king of the Targaryen dynasty. Several attempts have been made, since the death of the last dragon, to hatch these eggs by members of House Targaryen, including by Aegon III and his younger brother and Hand of the King, Viserys, Baelor I, Aegon V, and Aerys II. History. A complete history of House Targaryen is planned for Fire and Blood, to be published several years after the completion of A Song of Ice and Fire. Origins and relocation. House Targaryen was one of the 40 ancient noble houses known as Dragon Lords who ruled the Valyrian Freehold, a great empire spanning much of Essos. The Targaryens were not one of the most powerful houses, however. The family resided in Valyria until Daenerys Targaryen, also known as Daenerys the Dreamer, the daughter of Lord Enar Targaryen, had visions of a cataclysm that would come over Valyria. Enar sold his estates in Valyria and moved his wives, children, other relatives, slaves, wealth, and 5 dragons, including Balerion, to Dragonstone, an island at the entrance of Blackwater Bay and the westernmost outpost of Valyrian influence, where he took possession of a castle of the same name, in 114 BC. 12 years later the doom descended on the city of Valyria, leading to the collapse of the freehold. The Targaryens were the only dragon riders of Valyria to survive. In the century that followed, 4 of the 5 dragons of House Targaryen died, with only Balerion surviving. 2 more dragons, Rhaegar and Meraxes, were hatched from eggs on Dragonstone, however. During the century after the doom, which became known as the Century of Blood due to the violent struggles for power in Essos, Volantis attempted to seize power over Valyria's colonies. Most of the other free cities rebelled against Volantis, and towards the end of the Century of Blood, the young Lord Aegon Targaryen, rider of the dragon Balerion, was approached by Pentos and Tyrosh to form an alliance. Aegon, mounted on his dragon Balerion, flew to meet the Prince of Pentos, and then to Lys, where he set the Volantine fleet aflame. With Volantis's campaign at an end, he returned to Dragonstone and focused his attention to the lands west, which had always been of interest to him. Aegon's conquest. Aegon Targaryen, Lord of Dragonstone, aspired to unite the 7 kingdoms of Westeros under one ruler. Slightly more than 100 years after the doom of Valyria, in 2 BC, he began his invasion, in which he was aided by his 2 sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya. All 3 were dragon riders, and used their dragons, Balerion, Meraxes, and Rhaegar in battle. Aegon's conquest, which lasted for 2 years, began with Aegon's landing at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush with a small force, and ended when Aegon was anointed king by the High Septon in Old Town. Aegon's conquest, which lasted for 2 years, began with Aegon's landing at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush with a small force. House Hor, the kings of the Isles and the rivers, were extinguished in the burning of Harrenhal, and Aegon granted the riverlands to House Tully. House Durrandon, the Storm Kings, were defeated in the last storm and replaced by House Baratheon, whose founder Orys was Aegon's half-brother. Visenya achieved the submission of Crack Claw Point, but Dorne refused to yield to Rhaenys. House Gardner, the kings of the Reach, were extinguished at the Field of Fire and replaced by House Tyrell, and House Lannister, the kings of the Rock, submitted the following day. Rather than face House Targaryen's dragons, House Stark, the kings in the north, and House Arryn, the kings of Mountain and Vale, also submitted to the invaders. The conquest ended when Aegon was anointed king by the High Septon in Old Town. From the swords of his enemies, Aegon created the Iron Throne, and the dynasty he began would rule for nearly 300 years. Aegon had constructed a wooden castle, the Aegon Fort, at the place where he had first come to shore, and the town that grew around it became King's Landing, the kingdom's new capital. Dragonstone remained in the possession of the Targaryens as well, and was one of Aegon's favorite places. The region around King's Landing became known as the Crown Lands. During his invasion of the Iron Islands, King Aegon allowed the Iron Islands to choose House Greyjoy as their new rulers. First Dornish War. In 4 AC, Aegon's wars of conquest continued with the First Dornish War, during which he and Rhaenys attempted to bring the Dornish under Targaryen rule as well. This was a bloody war, during which Queen Rhaenys Targaryen was killed with her dragon, Meraxes, at Hellhold in 10 AC. An assassination attempt on Aegon that same year led to the creation of the King's Guard, who would guard the kings of the realm for centuries to come. The First Dornish War eventually ended in 13 AC, after Nymor Martell, Prince of Dorne, had sent his daughter Doreah to King's Landing with a letter and the skull of Meraxes. Though the contents of the letter have never been revealed, Aegon agreed to end the war the next day. Chapter 05, The Wizard and the Witcher. Cadmus naturally noticed the arrival of dozens of people all at once. His emerald green eyes analyzed the newcomers. They wore thick winter clothes with furs and other things, clothing not commonly used, especially in the south of Westeros. Every man and woman had noble house sigils on their clothes. The most important was naturally the man surrounded in the middle. Gray eyes, medium-length brown hair, and an above-average, yet quite majestic, appearance. The wolf sigil on his robes was like a shout announcing the man's identity, especially next to his wife, sons, and daughters. House Stark of Winterfell. 2. Cadmus really didn't expect to find such important people as soon as he stopped being a hermit in the forest. His green eyes quickly fell upon the silent young man with black hair and gray eyes. He looked more like a Stark than any of Eddard's other sons or daughters. 1. Jon Snow. Looking at the young man, Cadmus was disappointed not to feel any fiery aura around him, showing that Jon Snow was indeed a bastard of Eddard Stark. However, he found this normal. 5. Rhaegar and Lyanna were alive. If Jon were truly Rhaegar's son, the king and the second queen of the 7 kingdoms would never allow the boy to go to the north and be raised as a bastard. This could only happen if Lyanna had died in childbirth and Eddard had the determination to steal the boy from his father. 4. There were many thoughts in Cadmus's mind, but he didn't look at the Stark entourage from the north anymore. He was focused on devouring the chicken on his plate, which was unexpectedly delicious, despite lacking some seasoning. 1. Tasting the beer, Cadmus discreetly spat the liquid back into the wooden cup and looked at Gerald in disbelief. How can you drink this? You get used to it. Gerald replied with an indifferent tone. The drink was bad, but cheap, and it could warm the body on cold nights, and it was better than drinking water, which could be contaminated with something. 1. This time it was Cadmus who rolled his eyes. He wouldn't get used to it and would never drink this beer, which could be called horse piss, again. 1. Reaching into his pouch, Cadmus pulled out a delicate bottle of wine and served himself. It was a slightly sweet wine, but as it went down, it left his throat comfortable. He had some truly magical drinks, but he didn't take them out of the pouch, they were rare drinks even for him. Smelling the delicious aroma of the wine, Gerald looked at the beer in his hand and the delicious wine in Cadmus's cup. Seeing the green eyes full of provocation and amusement, he knew the boy wanted him to ask for some wine. Would Gerald ask for some wine? The answer was no, he would rather drink horse piss than humiliate himself for a drink. Seeing Gerald drinking beer with an indifferent expression, Cadmus was disappointed. He would have liked to see the Witcher's expression when he was asking. Boy, people are looking at us. Gerald drank a little and spoke in a deep tone, he could feel everyone's eyes focused on their table. 4. Well, they must have smelled the wine. Cadmus said with an indifferent expression. Besides the wonderful taste, his wine exuded a tempting smell. Just as a bee is attracted to a flower, the same happened with humans. The wine, which had a purple and red appearance, looked very beautiful, exuding a slightly sweet, delicate, and smooth aroma. 2. Fortunately, I have a scary witcher right next to me, or certain people would have caused trouble. Cadmus commented with a smile, looking at the people around. However, Cadmus underestimated something, especially the arrogance of a certain heir of the Iron Islands. 6. Theon approached with a smile. He was a thin, dark-haired, handsome young man with black hair and a lean, dark face. He seemed to find everything amusing and wore a smug smile. How much does this wine cost? He asked with a smile. He didn't greet them, he didn't think it was necessary and definitely felt there was no point in greeting such people. 4. Do I look like a merchant to you, little squid abandoned by your father? Looking at Theon, Cadmus spoke with a smile, his voice was not low, so everyone heard very clearly. 15. The Northerners watched with excitement what was about to happen, especially John Umber, known as Great Jon Umber. 1. Theon's jaw twitched. He looked at the figure covered in a cloak and hood with a cold and humiliated look. Since there was no sigil on the cloak, the man was not a noble. Putting his hand on the hilt of his sword, he practically growled his words. How dare you speak to me like that, the heir to the Seastone chair? 7. The loud and furious voice made a silence hang in the air, everyone's eyes were focused on the corner table at that moment. Little squid, if you draw your sword, I will deliver your head to your rapist father in Pike, to bury you next to your dead brothers. Calmly taking a sip of wine, Cadmus spoke in an amused tone, but tinged with a touch of danger. He hated being threatened, especially by someone he deeply despised. 8. The Northerners showed excited expressions and banged their fists on the table, creating a tense and lively atmosphere. If there was anyone who hated the Greyjoys, it was the North. Over thousands of years, the North had been attacked and plundered by the Iron Islands fleets. In the Greyjoy rebellion against House Targaryen, Balon Greyjoy knelt before Rhaegar after a crushing defeat. Theon became heir to the Iron Islands in that battle, where his two brothers, Roderick and Meryn, were killed during the Battle of Sigurd. Feeling a chill run down his body, Theon unconsciously backed away. A trace of hesitation passed through his eyes before they became confident again. When he was about to draw his sword, a red-haired young man held his shoulder and looked at him with a deep gaze. 1. I apologize for my friend's behavior, he drank too much on the way here. Robb spoke in a calm, yet quite sincere tone. 2. It's all right, heir of Winterfell, but I would be careful in the future. Cadmus said with a smile, looking at Robb and Theon. Some people only change their nature when they suffer a lot. 1. Robb frowned, he didn't quite understand the mysterious man's words, but he nodded and pulled Theon away. Is he Balon Greyjoy's only son? Gerald looked at Theon with a touch of curiosity. He had heard of the old Lord of Pike, the lord who had rebelled against House Targaryen because he thought King Rhaegar I Targaryen was weak. In the end, the rebellion lasted about 2 years before being crushed by the forces of House Targaryen. Balon lost his Seastone chair, 2 sons, and almost lost his head. He only didn't die because the king didn't want the Iron Islands to fall into chaos, and no one wanted to take Pike's place. 9. He's lucky the king placed him under Lord Eddard's protection, otherwise, with the Greyjoy house's reputation, it's very likely that Theon would die of some disease or simply a mysterious accident. Cadmus said with a sarcastic smile. No one liked Dorne, but they despised the Iron Islands even more. Those rapists were truly hated by everyone. Gerald nodded, agreeing with his words. Eddard Stark of Winterfell's reputation was truly impeccable with nothing but a bastard born out of wedlock. But, in his eyes, this was not really a serious matter, especially for him, who was a witcher and had an extremely high libido. 2. However, the king is quite benevolent, any other king would have cut off everyone's heads. Gerald commented in a calm tone. After all, the Baratheon rebellion ended only 13 years ago, any chaos can lead the kingdom to even greater chaos. Especially with House Lannister becoming increasingly powerful. Cadmus commented in a calm tone. Honestly, without Robert spending countless golden dragons every year, House Lannister's gold mines could still provide gold, even if for a short time. The kingdom seems united, but it is not. House Lannister, House Tully, House Arryn formed an alliance after the rebellion. House Targaryen, House Martell, and now House Tyrell formed a delicate balance. Cadmus continued speaking. The king destroyed House Greyjoy's forces, leaving them powerless and unable to start another rebellion anytime soon. House Stark is still neutral, but who knows if Queen Lyanna can convince her brother to join the king. 4. Gerald looked at the boy with a surprised look. He thought Cadmus would not be familiar with politics because he was isolated, but it seemed the boy had been preparing for a long time to enter the Targaryen court. This tournament at Harrenhal will be interesting, Cadmus said with a smile. Chapter 06, Encounter with Wolves. Those two are dangerous, especially the hooded man. Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch, spoke in a calm and deep tone, his eyes still fixed on the two men in the corner with a curious look. In his eyes, Cadmus was someone extremely dangerous, so dangerous that he couldn't even do anything before being killed by the enemy. This surprised him. He was not only a powerful knight but also a wizard, even if he was a wizard focused on auxiliary magic, such as seeing fragments of the future and controlling some swamp roots, he was still a wizard. 5. Knowing the history of the Crannogman's magic from House Reed, Eddard nodded, a solemn expression appearing on his face before relaxing again. He would not casually become an enemy of such a man. Arya's eyes were also focused on the two figures in the corner of the tavern. The curiosity in her grey eyes was so great that they seemed to shine. Noticing that everyone was no longer paying attention to the two mysterious men, she quickly sneaked away and approached their table. Arya's actions might go unnoticed by others, but for Gerald and Cadmus, the Stark girl was no different than walking in the light. However, neither of them did anything, she was just a curious child. But Cadmus was surprised. The girl sat down in the empty chair next to Cadmus and Gerald with a simply uninhibited naturalness. I'm Arya Stark. 7. Cadmus's green eyes and Gerald's golden cat-like eyes stared at the girl with curious looks. Both were surprised by the girl's courage. Just the existence of a witcher like Gerald was enough to scare most people. Not to mention Cadmus, who looked mysterious, and mysterious was even scarier. 1. Arya was not intimidated by the looks in both pairs of eyes. Now that she was close to both men, she could see their appearance. Cadmus was handsome like a beautiful prince, an elegant, cold, and noble face, his green eyes looked like two beautiful emeralds. Gerald was naturally very handsome, his resolute, sharp face and defined jaw were capable of seducing countless women. 6. Seeing Cadmus's appearance, Arya supposed that Sansa would fall in love with him without any shadow of a doubt. As for why Sansa would fall in love with a man, little Arya had no idea. Men were not attractive to her. 10. Cadmus Peverell, young lady. Cadmus introduced himself with a smile as he placed his hand on his chest and bowed slightly forward. His green eyes stared at Arya with an amused and provocative look. Just as Cadmus expected, Arya showed an unpleasant expression at being called a lady. She spoke, almost growling her words. I'm not a lady and I never will be one. I hate dresses and prefer pants and swords. 4. Cadmus laughed, and even Gerald showed a small and almost imperceptible smile on his lips. Arya's voice was not low, so everyone heard and looked back at the table in the corner. Everyone was surprised to see Arya sitting at the table and talking. The girl is like Lyanna, a free spirit. The lady of Bear Island and head of House Mormont, Maege, commented with a smile. The Stark girl was brave, free, and very much resembled Lyanna. She will be a great warrior in the future. Her words made the Northern Lords agree. They knew Lyanna and knew the girl was like Lyanna. However, not everyone was happy. Catelyn's face was livid, there was anger, resentment, and helplessness. In her eyes, Arya's declaration was not feminine and far from suitable to be a lady. How would Arya arrange a marriage with a man from a great noble house acting that way? Ned, she might be in danger. Catelyn whispered in her husband's ear. Leaving aside Arya's words, she was worried about her presence around suspicious people, especially a cursed witcher and a suspicious hooded man. 4. Eddard frowned, he looked at Arya talking amicably and then at the two men. Seeing that neither showed impatience and seemed to be answering her questions, he didn't think there was any danger. Especially since he recognized Gerald, the White Wolf, a famous witcher, and despite the reputation that he was a cruel man with enemies, there was never any report that he was evil. However, he was still worried. Robb, Jon, go and stay with your sister, Eddard said in a calm tone. Although he didn't think anything would happen, it was better to be cautious than to believe in the kindness of others. Robb's eyes lit up at his father's words. He wanted to meet both men. After all, it wasn't every day that someone met a witcher and a man suspected of being a wizard. 4. Robb and Jon exchanged glances and stood up. Both walked toward the table, and the closer they got, the more they heard Arya's surprised exclamations and admiration in her eyes. Seeing Robb and Jon approaching, Arya spoke excitedly to them. Robb, Jon, Gerald was telling how he won a fight against a griffin. Both showed surprised looks and looked at Gerald with admiration. The North admired the strong, they were not exempt from this feeling. Cadmus wanted to laugh, but he held back, especially seeing Gerald's indifferent face, but he knew the man was quite happy with the sincere and pure admiration of a child. It was like being purified after seeing such human ugliness and sins. Sit down, Robb Stark and Jon Snow. Cadmus invited the two with a smile and looked at them curiously. Robb and Jon were as different as could be expected. He understood why Catelyn hated Jon. The boy was a Stark from head to toe. Robb was the complete opposite. He inherited the blue eyes and red hair of House Tully. I'm Cadmus Peverell, this cold and indifferent guy next to me is Gerald, known as the White Wolf. Cadmus introduced himself and Gerald, who only grunted in response. Don't worry about him, he doesn't talk much. 1. Forgive my ignorance, but I don't know any House Peverell. Rob sat down and asked curiously. Surnames were typical of nobles and powerful people. Commoners usually used the name of the city they were born in as a surname, like Thoros of Mere. If you did, I'd be surprised. Cadmus said with a laugh. If Rob knew what House Peverell was, he would genuinely be surprised. After all, it was a noble house from a totally different universe. It would be a shock if that happened. 1. Cadmus began to talk to both of them. The conversation was quite pleasant, especially with Cadmus sharing knowledge that most common people didn't know. Lord Cadmus is a wizard. Jon Snow asked his first word during the conversation. The only reason Jon spoke was that he didn't feel any contempt or disgust coming from Cadmus, even knowing his origin. Cadmus looked at Jon and smiled. He didn't answer with words, but with actions. With a flick of his finger, Gerald's beer jumped out of his cup and took the form of a whale, floating around the table with elegant and smooth movements. Gerald looked at his beer with an expressionless look and then looked at Cadmus with an unpleasant look. 2. Incredible! Arya exclaimed in surprise as she watched the beer whale pass close to her, her eyes shining with admiration, fascination, and disbelief, completely amazed by the scene before her. It wasn't just Arya, Rob and Jon were also equally incredulous and amazed by what was happening before them. I wish I could do that. Arya said with a touch of envy. Cadmus looked at her, then at Rob and Jon, and smiled. Technically, you of House Stark have a talent for magic, although it's only projection magic. 3. His words made everyone around the table, and even at the table where Eddard Stark was, fall into complete silence. You are descendants of the first men. Maybe you didn't realize it, but you've already had some magical experience. Especially the little lady next to me, she probably has dreams where she sees herself in an animal's body. That is her magic, the magic of projecting consciousness into an animal and seeing what happens through the eyes of an animal. Cadmus commented casually, as if it were not something incredible but completely normal. Skin changer. Howard Reed spoke. Everyone looked at their liege lord and nodded. Although it was considered something dangerous and with an origin of fear, they didn't dare to say anything against their liege lord and sovereign. 2. Arya's eyes widened. She never thought that her dreams were actually the magic inside her gradually awakening. Rob and Jon were also surprised. Although their dreams were not as frequent as Arya's, they also had certain strange dreams. Chapter 07, Encounter with Wolves. Can I learn? Arya asked without any hesitation or concern for the consequences of her own words. After all, despite what the girl said, she was a lady of a great noble house. Arya learning magic meant many things, especially for the faith of the Seven, who would see this as an affront to their authority. The North not only had different gods, but also harbored mages. This could very well trigger a chain of quite significant events throughout all the Seven Kingdoms. But Cadmus thought about this for only a moment and smiled gently. He didn't give a damn about what his actions would cause. Reaching into his bag, Cadmus took a while to find the books he wanted, and when he grabbed them, he pulled them out of the bag. The book wasn't thick, it had about 10 pages. It was a book containing everything about what the people of this world called skin changer. 9. This book will help you enhance your powers. If you have talent, you could even control bears, lions, and even a dire wolf. Cadmus handed the book to Arya and said with a smile. Just like Brynden Rivers used to control hundreds of ravens, which became his eyes and ears. 5. Hearing the name of the great bastard, Jon Snow's eyes lit up. Brynden Rivers had always been one of his favorite heroes from the stories, a royal bastard who became Hand of the King during the reigns of Aerys I and Maekar I. 2. Note, the great bastards were the sons and daughters of King Aegon IV with other women of noble birth, so they were called great bastards. Rob also looked at the book with an excited gaze. Just hearing that he could control dire wolves was enough to make this young heir of Winterfell extremely excited. Heretical abomination, how dare he taint my daughter with his diabolic power. Catelyn could no longer stand still. As a faithful follower of the God of the Seven Faces, indoctrinated since youth to be an epitome of brainwashing, how could she accept her daughter performing such heretical acts? 15. However, her words made all the Northern Lords show expressions full of displeasure. Although they felt fear of magic, this was, in the end, a characteristic of the first men. Catelyn's words were practically insults to all of them, who were proud descendants of the first men. Even Eddard frowned before relaxing again. He looked at his wife and spoke, whispering discreetly to his wife, "Cat, watch your words." Catelyn looked at her husband with an irritated look, but taught to be a good wife and submissive to her husband, she closed her mouth, but anyone could see the veins pulsing on her forehead, showing how irritated she was at that moment. She could only look with anger and resentment at the source of all this. 1. As if feeling a gaze full of anger, resentment, and fury falling upon him, Cadmus raised the corners of his lips. He knew that Catelyn Stark, née Tully, was extremely irritated at that moment, but he didn't care about the faith of the Seven, so how could he care about a mere Catelyn? Are you sure you want to give us this book? Rob asked with an uncertain tone. It might seem like a simple book, but this book could create someone similar to Brynden Rivers from generation to generation for House Stark. As heir to the North and a talented strategist, he could see the infinite possibilities with this magic. As Cadmus had said, Brynden Rivers became a master spy with this power. If House Stark had this power, they could control the entire north much more easily. So Cadmus's gift was really very expensive. So expensive that he couldn't imagine why this mysterious man would share this knowledge. If Cadmus heard Robb's thoughts, he would have said that they both had different worldviews. If Robb had such knowledge, it would be a secret that only House Stark should possess, but in Cadmus's eyes, knowledge was everyone's right, regardless of noble birth or not. 28. It's just a copy, I have about 5 more, so don't worry and accept it. Cadmus spoke with a smile, and his words sounded enigmatic as a mage should be. I'd like to see how much a book could alter someone's future. Robb, Jon, and naturally Arya didn't understand his words, but that didn't stop them from being happy to receive such an extraordinary book. Especially Robb, who was smiling as if he had just lost his virginity. As for the faith of the Seven, just like Cadmus, Robb never cared about that arrogant church. The North had its own gods and wouldn't accept other gods, especially those of the Undulls. If it weren't for Catelyn, the North wouldn't even have a church dedicated to the faith of the Seven. 3. Cadmus smiled, seeing the expressions of the 3 Starks. He really wanted to see what a mere magic book could do to alter someone's fate. That's why he loved magic. Only magic could perform this kind of miracle. Let's rest. Gerald, who was already impatient with so many people around him, spoke in a calm tone. Cadmus looked at him and nodded, put the money for the meal on the table, and left with the Witcher, but not before nodding to Eddard Stark. In this alternate universe, this man endured immense pressure by remaining neutral in a political minefield. Everyone wanted the North as allies, as this cold and lifeless region had powerful and experienced warriors. Honestly, Cadmus found it hard to believe that Eddard would come to the south. It was obvious that the king wanted to conquer the North, and for that, the princes and princesses would probably become a political tool to unite the noble houses. Of course, Tywin Lannister wouldn't let that happen so easily. Cadmus could even imagine that through Hoster Tully, he had already influenced Catelyn to marry Sansa or Arya to Joffrey or Tommen Tully. Eddard nodded back and continued eating. He wouldn't easily become an enemy of such a mysterious mage, but he certainly wouldn't become his friend either. Magic was frightening, and he wanted to stay away from it. As for Robb accepting the magic book, Eddard turned a blind eye to it. Robb would become Lord of Winterfell and had his own thoughts, which made him happy, because a lord without courage or determination would never be able to lead the Northmen. Leaving the tavern, Gerald and Cadmus walked to a not-so-cozy hotel and rented a room for a day. Once inside the room, Gerald looked at Cadmus and spoke in a curious tone. You know you're going to cause chaos if the faith of the Seven finds out about this, right? Cadmus lay down on one of the 2 beds in the room and spoke in a casual tone. Of course I know, but I need to face this stupid religion alone, so I have to win some allies. Who better than the future Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell? This is a dangerous game, Cadmus. Placing the 2 swords, one silver and the other steel, beside the bed, Gerald spoke in a solemn tone. Gods exist and aren't as benevolent as the Holy Scriptures claim they are. Cadmus looked at Gerald and smiled. Who said I'm less dangerous than a god? His words were arrogant, but when you have magic capable of distorting reality itself, those words aren't so arrogant. 6. He wanted to be the Merlin of this world, and he chose Rhaegar as his King Arthur. If Rhaegar didn't work out, he would support Daenerys as Merlin supported Artoria Pendragon. As for the fear of death, he didn't have it. Dying erased his fear of death. 18. Of course, that's not to say he wanted to die, but he simply no longer feared death. And if he died for his dreams, he wouldn't die with regrets. He had already lived a normal life and didn't want to live another normal life, especially with the power he had. 2. Seeing the boy's relaxed expression, Gerald had to admit, he felt a bit of admiration for the boy. Not just anyone could remain calm and relaxed even knowing they would face gods. Just be careful and cautious. That was the only advice Gerald could give Cadmus. Cadmus looked at Gerald and smiled. Although it was difficult to become friends with this cold and indifferent Witcher, it was a real and solid friendship. Don't worry, I am the most powerful wizard in the world. Chapter 08, Encounter with Wolves. Cadmus and Gerald didn't stay long in the village and didn't want to accompany House Stark's retinue to Harrenhal. The Witcher continued riding on Plotka while the mage continued walking on foot along the King's Road. However, soon the entire House Stark retinue followed behind him without any delay. Which wasn't surprising, both weren't going fast, so it wasn't difficult for them to close the distance, although everyone kept their distance. Cadmus didn't mind, but he always stopped in a village during the journey, helping the sick with potions, especially children and the elderly, who were more susceptible to contracting diseases. He also explained the basics of hygiene, although he doubted some would follow through. Those nobles would kill to buy one of your potions and you give them away for free to the people. Seeing Cadmus helping a sick child drink the green healing potion, Gerald commented in a calm tone, but there was a touch of admiration in his voice. He had seen many noble houses over his 80 years, but none could have such a good upbringing to the point of teaching someone like Cadmus. Surprisingly, even having power above others, he didn't despise life, on the contrary, he seemed to value it more than anything, especially the lives of the poor and needy. I can make infinite money with my potions, so it costs nothing to use my potions to help those who never got help. Besides, I can see the results of my potions firsthand, which is a very good reward. Cadmus said with a smile. 2. He touched the child's forehead, and feeling that the fever had gone down, he waved to the woman beside him, who thanked him repeatedly while looking at him gratefully. Fever in this world was a deadly disease, especially for children. Gerald rolled his eyes, feeling that Cadmus's reasons were just a disguise to prevent others from seeing that he was a good man. However, he didn't unmask Cadmus and just nodded. "How many people have you saved this week?" Gerald asked as he mounted Roach again. 3. 42, 30 were children and 10 were elderly and only 2 were adult men. Cadmus said with a helpless sigh. The infant mortality rate was extremely high, but there was no way to improve it. On Earth, there were countries that had high birth rates, much less in this world stagnant in time. And the birth rate was so high that out of 6 children, 4 died before reaching adulthood. This wasn't Cadmus assuming, but what he had learned this week traveling. The most terrible thing was that people were used to death around them, showing how backward this world was. After seeing that no one was sick, Cadmus showed a satisfied look and left the village. However, a few miles later, he stopped. Not just him, Gerald also stopped. The medallion on his chest began to tremble uncontrollably. Gerald dismounted from the horse and drew the silver sword from the sheath on his back, his feline eyes scanning the environment with a cold and calm gaze. His nose twitched again, the smell of death and decomposition entered his nose. "Ghoul," Gerald said in a calm tone. As an experienced witcher, he recognized the smell instantly. 1. There are many. Cadmus said in a calm tone. A fog appeared in the surroundings, and even though it was afternoon, the environment seemed to darken in an instant. A wand appeared in his hand, black as night and even more magnificent. "Let me remove this fog," Cadmus said and moved his wrist to the right. "Ventus." With his words, a dome of wind expanded with Cadmus at the center, pushing away all the fog in the surroundings. Gerald's eyes sharpened seeing the dozens of ghouls, their putrid and disgusting bodies, their red eyes full of hatred and hunger for living beings. The Witcher didn't hesitate, entered combat position and waited. He knew that ghouls had no patience at all and would soon attack in a group. Just as Gerald expected, the dozen ghouls advanced with roars and open mouths. The Witcher moved to the side and with a quick movement, decapitated the nearest one. He didn't stop, took a step forward and cut the ghoul in half. When he was about to kill the next one, small fireballs advanced, tearing through the air and hitting the rest of the ghouls. Arg! 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 The bestial scream sounded full of pain as their bodies were engulfed by flames, soon after to be reduced to ashes in the next second. 1. Gerald looked around and seeing that there were no more ghouls, he didn't relax and with the silver sword in hand, he walked toward the 2 ghouls he had killed. Seeing that one was still alive, even after being cut in half, the Witcher finished off the creature by plunging the sword into its head. As far as I know, ghouls aren't uncommon in cemeteries, ancient tombs, necropolises, and battlefields. Cadmus said, putting away his wand. Is there anything like that nearby? Gerald thought for a moment and shook his head. He had already traveled throughout the Riverlands and knew there was nothing of the sort in the surroundings, so the presence of so many ghouls was suspicious and very unusual. 1. Could they have been brought from another location? Cadmus proposed a theory in a calm tone. He could imagine countless people trying to attack the king's reputation with this kind of cruel method. After all, if the king couldn't protect even the king's road, then his ability was questionable. I hate politics. Gerald spoke in a tone full of dissatisfaction. Although there was no proof or even indication, it was better to believe this than another crazier theory. 1. Suddenly, hearing the sound of horses behind him, Cadmus saw that the Stark retinue had caught up with them again. Leading the group, Eddard Stark with his calm and silent expression. His eyes swept the battlefield, lingering for a moment on the bodies of the ghouls on the ground. He frowned before relaxing again. He used his heels to gently tap the horse's belly and approached. Many ghouls? He asked in a deep tone. A dozen. Cadmus answered with a smile on his lips. He looked at the Warden of the North and added. They probably came from outside the Riverlands. Eddard narrowed his eyes and understood the implications in the mysterious mage's words. There was only one person who could try to end the king's reputation in this way. The old lion of Casterly Rock seemed to watch the 7 kingdoms lying on the great rock. Lord Stark should be careful in the south, every time a Stark goes south it doesn't end well. Cadmus warned the silent wolf of House Stark. He wasn't lying. If Eddard went south and joined the political whirlpool in Harrenhal, things would get complicated. 2. Both sides fought to conquer the north, and to prevent the enemy from gaining an advantage in the future war, they would rather destroy House Stark and leave the north in chaos. Of course, with one of the 2 queens being from House Stark, the most likely one to attack House Stark was House Lannister. After all, as long as House Stark remained neutral, House Targaryen wouldn't antagonize House Stark because of Queen Lyanna. Eddard looked deeply at the mysterious mage and nodded. He felt that the mage had good intentions, but it was inevitable to go to Harrenhal. He had to see his sister and help his nephew sit on the Iron Throne. 2. Thank you, sir, I will proceed with caution. Eddard said in a polite tone and quickly returned to House Stark's retinue. 1. What a stubborn wolf. Cadmus said with a laugh. Knowing he's walking into a trap, he still moves forward. Wolves are united, they don't abandon family. Gerald spoke in a calm tone as he mounted his horse, Roach, again. 2. People are moved by emotion, how many can claim they remained indifferent to their own family's safety? Cadmus agreed with Gerald's words. As someone who loved with the intensity of a volcano and valued those he loved, he would fight fiercely for his family. However, in the face of absolute strength, Any conspiracy is nothing but a paper weapon, easily crushed. Cadmus thought calmly. He wasn't afraid of getting involved in conspiracies. Unlike Eddard, he had the strength to protect himself. Chapter 09, The Castle of Harrenhal. During the journey, Cadmus continued treating the sick, children, men, women, and the elderly. He didn't care if you were a beggar or a farmer, he treated everyone equally. The only inconvenience was that every village had some stupid fanatic who called him countless insults. Cadmus was not someone who liked to be insulted, so he would turn these people into frogs for a period of time. The expressions of the people when they saw that he had turned another person into a frog were simply funny. Cadmus's actions caused a little fear in people, but they were soon relieved to know that it was temporary. Although it still left the people afraid, after all, they were just simple, illiterate people, and anything unknown caused fear and admiration. On the King's Road, after 2 weeks of travel, Cadmus and Gerald saw a huge castle on the horizon. Harrenhal is a gigantic castle, enormous in proportion, with thick, black walls that seem to have been carved from stone darkened by fire. Its 5 huge towers, once the largest in the 7 kingdoms, rise like deformed columns, melted walls, deep cracks, and stone blocks twisted by dragon fire heat. Some towers are broken at the top, others tilted, as if about to collapse, but still colossal enough to cast vast shadows over the lake. Harrenhal's gates are tall and heavy, guarded by walls so thick they look like artificial mountains. Inside, the courtyards are wide and empty, flanked by burned structures, roofless halls, crooked arcades, and staircases that go nowhere. The melted stone runs down the walls as if it had flowed and hardened halfway, creating irregular and scarred shapes. From afar, the castle looks like a huge black ruin, too immense to be ignored, too large to have survived the fire intact, a monument of broken, scarred, and overwhelming stone. An eternal reminder of the flames of Bael Ryan, the Black Dread. 2. Even knowing that the castle was large, Cadmus was still shocked to see the gigantic rocky monstrosity before him. He couldn't believe that such a thing was made by humans without any magic or science. It was madness to think that humans did such a thing with only human strength and primitive engineering. 6. Seeing Cadmus's expression, Gerald was not surprised. He had the same reaction when he saw the gigantic castle. Anyone who saw such a large castle for the first time would be amazed at how incredible humans could be. Cadmus followed Gerald through the gigantic gates while admiring the inside of the castle. There were tents everywhere, each colored and with a different noble coat of arms. He estimated there were about 700 people, all from noble houses. This was the first tournament of the Targaryen dynasty after Robert's rebellion. It was a rare event where all young knights wanted to gain fame and perhaps even marry a princess. Although it was a foolish dream, it was what motivated these young knights full of ambition and naivete. Poor fools, they think a tournament is something without danger. Cadmus commented upon seeing the youth and ambition in the eyes of these young knights. Tournaments were dangerous, and even nobles could die in the combat tournament or in the jesting. If you were lucky enough to find a knight of the King's Guard, it could save your life, but if it's a knight who only thinks about winning, then pray to the god you believe in, because the chances of dying by a veteran and experienced knight are high. Men kill each other for glory, money, and women, there's nothing new about that. Gerald rode with a calm expression. In his 80 years, he had seen countless men die for these things, but there was something they all had in common. 1. They all regretted it in death and were buried in the ground after they died. At the end of your life, will you regret it, Gerald? Cadmus looked at the Witcher and asked with a smile. I'll die in the mouth of some monster, alone and with only the emptiness of my mind, just as I was born. Gerald replied in a calm tone. There is no regret for a Witcher, only the lament of such a lonely life. Cadmus looked deeply at the Witcher and couldn't help but think that this was truly sad. This man risked his life to kill monsters and save people his whole life, but there would be no one by his side in the end. It was sad and personified well the phrase that heroes are forgotten. You won't die alone, Gerald. Cadmus said with a smile. Even in your death, I'll still be there to provoke you one last time. 5. Gerald twisted his lips and felt he should draw his steel sword and kill Cadmus. The boy really knew how to annoy him. Didn't he even deserve a peaceful death? 1. Ignoring the boy, Gerald dismounted from the horse and held the reins. He approached a young man who smelled of horse manure and spoke in a cold tone. If she loses a single hair, I will make you suffer. Faced with the cold, golden feline eyes, the young man felt his legs weaken. He swallowed hard and nodded quickly. Don't worry, sir, I'll take good care of her. Stammering, he said with a determined tone to protect the horse with his life. Gerald showed a satisfied look and walked away, but saw Cadmus hand a gold dragon to the young man before following him. Good cop, bad cop always works. Cadmus said with a laugh and didn't care if Gerald understood his metaphor. 3. It wasn't the first time Gerald had heard strange words and phrases from Cadmus and he simply ignored him. I'm going to talk to the Hand of the King, don't cause trouble. The Witcher warned in a calm and deep tone. Seeing Gerald's back moving away, Cadmus rolled his eyes. Although he liked to provoke people, it didn't mean he was a childish fool. 2. Without Gerald, Cadmus walked through the tents, listening to people's conversations, gossip, and curiosities. Rhaegar Targaryen's court came down to one thing, a delicate political balance that made him admire the Targaryen king. 1. This was not the Targaryen dynasty at its peak, the Targaryens had lost their dragons and consequently, their absolute dominance over the vassals. Robert's rebellion was not the first, House Baratheon had already rebelled before, as had other houses, although nowhere near as impactful. 1. Westeros needed a king like Rhaegar, an experienced politician and warrior with prestige among the noble houses, which Rhaegar was. If it were a king like Baelor, Tywin would have rebelled once more. That's why Cadmus thought that Aegon, who was gay, would make the situation even more chaotic. Even if Aegon had Dorne's support, Dorne was too weak compared to the other kingdoms. 4. A king should be respected and feared, and believe me, sleeping with other men did not make a king respected or feared. What man would respect a king who liked to sleep with other men? 15. Cadmus was not prejudiced, but even on Earth, gay people still suffer from the stigma that they were not real men, much less in this backward world. So, in his eyes, Rhaegar, to prevent the war from breaking out again, should choose other people as heir or heiress. 7. Princess Rhaenys was more suitable than Aegon, at least by marrying the right man, the princess could keep the throne. As Cadmus walked, he had arrived by the God's Eye, the largest lake in Westeros. The lake was magnificent with its blue and green color, and from afar, the mage could see the mysterious Isle of Faces, which was said to house the children of the forest. Black swans could be seen on the shore, their magnificent black feathers looked especially lustrous because of the water on them. Cadmus approached the lake and was surprised to find two figures, one short and one tall. Looking closer, they were a small girl and a man. The man seemed to be the young woman's protector, as he looked like a bodyguard. Cadmus intentionally stepped on a branch, which alerted the girl and her knight. He finally saw the girl's appearance. She was not beautiful, her chin was square, her ears large, and unexpectedly, she had beautiful blue eyes. However, what caught Cadmus's attention was the area of her cheek and neck. Her left cheek and most of her neck were covered by cracked and peeling skin, gray and black, similar to stone. Chapter 10, The Castle of Harrenhal. Did I scare you, little milady? Cadmus asked with a smile, and even though they couldn't see his face completely, his smile was particularly gentle and amusing, which made others relax in his presence. 1. You just surprised me, sir. The girl said with a somewhat shy, but surprisingly gentle look. She looked down, never meeting anyone's eyes. She was obviously shy and had low self-esteem, which was not surprising given the grayscale on her face and neck. Cadmus Peverell, milady. Cadmus introduced himself while extending his hand. Shireen understood, but hesitated, but seeing the smile on the mysterious man's lips, she was brave for a moment and extended her hand, which Cadmus gently made the gesture of kissing, but did not touch his lips to the back of a maiden's hand. Shireen of House Baratheon. The girl, about 9 years old, introduced herself in a still shy tone. This one beside me is Lord Davos of House Seaworth. 1. The man nodded to Cadmus, although his hand had not left the hilt of his sword for a second. Cadmus looked at the Onion Knight with a smile. Davos is a thin man, with brown eyes and an ordinary face, marked by time. His beard and sparse brown hair are sprinkled with gray. 4. When Cadmus was about to speak, a beautiful and noble bird appeared in the air and perched on his shoulder. It was Mitra, who had just arrived. The noble creature looked at Cadmus and then at the child with ruby-red eyes. Shireen and Davos's attention was entirely on the bird. After all, besides its extraordinary appearance, it had just appeared out of nowhere, like a ghost. This is Mitra, my longtime friend. Cadmus said with a smile, but was surprised to see a phoenix feather separate from the bird's body and fall gently into Shireen's hand. The little girl felt her body warm up when the feather touched her hand. She looked at the beautiful, noble, and majestic bird with admiration, and even though she didn't know much, she knew it was an extraordinary bird. She liked you, she doesn't give her feathers to just anyone. Cadmus said, making a small smile appear on the child's lips. Turning to look at Davos, Cadmus spoke in a calm tone. Make a necklace with the feather and don't let the girl take it off for 3 days, not even to bathe. In the end, her disease will disappear. As soon as Cadmus's words sounded, Shireen's and Davos's eyes widened. Grayscale had no cure, but here was a mysterious man saying that the most mysterious and deadly disease would be cured because of a feather. This feather is not from a normal bird, it is the feather of a phoenix, one of the purest beings in the world, symbols of rebirth and healing. Her feathers can cure any disease. Cadmus explained with a smile and spoke of how extraordinary Mitra was. He wasn't afraid that others might become greedy, anyone who was so foolish he would kill. 1. Mitra raised her head proudly and looked at both of them with a nobility worthy of a queen. She looked at the child with a gentle gaze and after letting out a sharp cry, she abruptly disappeared with a snap in the air. Shireen couldn't help but be disappointed to see the noble and beautiful bird disappear. At the same time, she held the feather firmly in her hands. A hope was lit in her fragile and unconscious heart. Seeing this, Cadmus smiled gently. In the end, Shireen's feelings were what moved the phoenix. People with dirty hearts and full of sins were not even worthy to stand before Mitra. We will see each other again, little milady. I hope that by then, you will have become as lively as a child should be. Cadmus said with a laugh and turned around, disappearing into the bushes. It was a surprise that he had met Stannis' daughter, but he had more important things to do. Shireen looked at the feather in her hand and felt a warmth spread through her body. Even being by the lake, the cold seemed to disappear with the warmth in her body. He is a mage, I saw some when I was a smuggler. Davos spoke in a solemn tone. Mages were dangerous, the ones he saw were so arrogant that they seemed like kings just because they knew how to make a small flame or even scare some people, but the young man who disappeared before him was a true mage, of that he had no doubt. 1. How could the owner of a bird as mystical as a dragon be simple? 3. Shireen's eyes were full of childish curiosity and admiration. She never imagined that just by wanting to see swans, her destiny would completely change. 1. While Cadmus walks through the forest next to Harrenhal, Gerald was inside a tent larger and nobler than the others. The Witcher was standing before a middle-aged man, with bowl-cut brown hair and light brown eyes, a silver hand-shaped brooch hung on his chest. It was Sir Raymond Derry, from one of the oldest and most powerful noble houses in Westeros. Unlike in another universe, House Derry only prospered and practically controlled half of the Riverlands, something Rhaegar was more than happy to see. Thus, the Riverlands were in a silent civil war that House Tully had no control over its vassals. 3. Gerald, how was your trip to the north? My lands missed you, these damned monsters keep appearing more and more. Raymond asked with a smile. He had met the Witcher on a hunt and they soon became friends. Unlike people who thought that Witchers were the cause of monsters and only brought death wherever they went, he truly admired these men who underwent mutations just to hunt monsters. 1. Dangerous, the monsters in the north are even fiercer with the lack of food. Gerald replied in a calm tone. Since the north was less populated, the monsters there were even fiercer, so fierce that they even dared to enter the great cities. Raymond nodded and was not surprised. The north was truly dangerous, even the commoners had the combat power of trained soldiers, showing that the weak do not survive in the north. Remembering something, Raymond's good humor changed. He sighed and rubbed his forehead, feeling another headache coming on. He was really stressed these days. You look tired, old friend. Seeing Raymond's expression, Gerald spoke in a slightly worried tone. This damn tournament is expensive, time-consuming, and I still have to deal with these stupid nobles who get into duels over the slightest disagreement. Raymond commented in an irritated tone. He had dealt with such incidents so many times that he wished all these young knights would simply disappear from Harrenhal. However, what stresses me the most is the Queen Dowager. Leaning back in his chair, Raymond said, letting out a long sigh. Gerald raised an eyebrow and didn't even need to ask, as Raymond spoke before he could ask anything. The Queen Dowager is sick, and it's not an easy disease to cure. The Maestiffs are doing everything, but nothing works. The king is worried, and when the king is worried, we, mere advisors, suffer. 4. Maybe I can help. Gerald said, making the hand of the king's eyes widen slightly. Did you become a healer during your time in the north? Raymond asked in a teasing tone. He didn't believe Gerald's words. Not that he doubted the Witcher's abilities, but when it came to healing, there was no way a monster-killing machine would know the arts of healing. Not me, but I have a friend who can cure the queen. Gerald spoke in a solemn tone. How could he joke about something like that? Raymond's face finally showed a solemn expression. He believed that Gerald wouldn't joke about something like that. Satisfy my curiosity, Gerald. He said in a curious tone. My friend is a mage, an extremely powerful mage, but that's not what interests you. What interests you is that he is capable of manufacturing healing potions. Potions that I saw work on people in the last 2 weeks. Gerald explained and didn't hide anything. He also explained how Cadmus cured children, adults, women, and the elderly. 5. Raymond's face was uncertain. He trusted Gerald, but bringing a mage before the king would bring unpredictable consequences. Whether it was the Order of Maestiffs or the Faith of the Seven, neither organization liked magic. However, remembering the king, Raymond's expression showed determination. It better be that this mage is as good as you say, or he will suffer the consequences. Raymond said in a solemn tone. He couldn't afford to fail in helping the queen, or his position as hand of the king would fly away from him. Gerald nodded, but was not worried. He saw Cadmus save a child on the verge of death. He was not a charlatan, but a true mage.